Hey, what's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. I am Connor O'Gara. Will, everyone is at odds. Playoff rankings will do that, you know?
Yeah. You know what? This is the one night I wish we had skipped Maction. I wish we had had like a Sports Center feature on the 12 so I could just keep reviewing that. Because I clicked over there during All the Madness last night and I went, Bowling Green is on my television. I can't pay attention to this many things. This is the first time I've ever been upset at Maction.
Yeah. No, let's not blame Maction. Maction's not to blame. Maction never did anything wrong. The first playoff rankings, ESPN tried to make it as confusing as humanly possible by doing the bracket. I don't know why they messed around with showing the bracket instead of just showing us the rankings, and then afterwards saying, here's how those matchups would look. Hopefully they get some feedback internally, because I was like, what are we doing here?
They love that. Consumer feedback. Those folks at Disney.
Good Lord. Yes. First playoff rankings are out. It was good to get mad about stuff again. It was good to get mad on behalf of teams like BYU and SMU, ironically enough. Why in the world Penn State is sitting there at number 6 when their best win is at Wisconsin in a battle of backup quarterbacks? I don't know. I couldn't tell you. You know what I realized, Will, for the first time, and you're in this position every single time we do a podcast, and I try and account for it. And I value your perspective. And there's a reason why we do this together. And I'm not like, I need to have someone that's unbiased, because I like having the fan perspective. Mm-hmm. I think having the fan perspective is important. I think a lot of people in this business have realized that it's okay to have the fan perspective as long as you're not just strictly that all the time, 100% of the time.
Yeah, and I'm among the most unbiased fans, to be clear. I just want bad things to happen to my enemies. But I respect them when they do good things. To be clear, I respect when they do good things. I just hope they don't.
Yeah, exactly. But for the first time last night, I had this realization watching Indiana come in at number 8 of, if I say this, am I coming off as the biased one? If I bang the drum for like, hey, what's the difference between Indiana and Miami in terms of undefeated teams, in terms of quality of victories and whatnot, what am I really saying? And Miami has the Louisville win, which is looking better than Indiana, but like, are they that far apart? I realized in this moment, I better think twice and check my bias at the door of how this is going to come across. There's a reason why I talked about biases in the offseason and try to present them as much as possible. One of those being, I'm not a James Franklin guy. So I guess I kind of just outed myself with that take, but I get what you go through now. I get it more so than ever. And it was unbelievably strange to see my team sitting there at number 8 and wondering if it could have been even higher.
You know, they should have really just hit for the Connor cycle and had somebody go across the stage and start faking an injury, just in a suit, grabbing their pants, going, like Peter Griffin, just so you could really throw a remote at the TV. Right. But yeah, no, it's as wide open as ever, right? Like, that's the thing, the really soul crushing thing. And I hate to fansplain to you, but like BCS, I still vividly remember 2007 and those losses being like, we're done, we're cooked, we're out of here, we're done, and thinking that twice. And so as weird as it is, there's more chances than ever, but at the same time, there's more worthy. I mean, none of these teams are like contenders that we're talking about on the bubble. And I've said this in the preseason, which was, if your team is 14th, I don't feel bad for you. My team is like 14th, and I don't feel bad for me. 15th, so like, that's the thing. We're seeing that there are not this wave of contenders in the 16 ranking that we're getting left out.
Yeah, but I think still some actual takeaways from watching these rankings and seeing how a team like Notre Dame gets treated. I continue to say, Notre Dame is so important. If you're sitting there as an at-large team, which now obviously there are 7 at-large teams, you are watching that ranking like a hawk. And seeing the Irish come in at 10 actually is about as good as I think you could have hoped for. I didn't think they were going to come in at 15 or anything like that, because if Notre Dame loses another game, which they might not with what they have remaining on that schedule, still have Army coming up. That's their toughest game, ironically enough, is Army.
And we respect the troops.
All right. We respect the troops.
They're
Notre Dame
solid this year.
Notre Dame did not respect the troops with what it did to Navy, so that would give me a little bit of pause. Wow. Different offense that Army runs. But anyways,
we're likening them to the Taliban. They're going to sweep the troops?
Oh, gosh.
Just kidding.
You thought Notre Dame was hated before. Wait till they sweep the troops. So they're going to steal an at-large bid from somebody else. But they're one of those teams.
They're going to go, their best wins are the Army, the Navy, the Coast Guard.
At A&M. At A&M, kind of troops as well, of sorts.
Oh, my gosh.
Does Notre Dame hate the troops? Some are wondering. But yeah, that ranking is important to watch, I think, for those teams that are going to be outside looking in at a conference championship. So there are, I think, important things. If I'm a Georgia fan, I feel perfectly fine being at number 3. I would have had them at number 2. I thought that was recency bias with Ohio State after the Penn State win. And you could have very easily just flipped it and been like, all right, well, what if Georgia had just beaten Texas and Ohio State had just had the nail biter game against Nebraska? But instead, those results were obviously flipped with what Georgia was coming off of against Florida. So, I still think that Texas is probably getting the benefit of the doubt for what it did at Michigan. And if we really were getting critical about resumes and comparing Texas and Penn State's resume to SMU's resume, it doesn't really hold up. A lot of uniform bias that seems to be at play so far in these first rankings.
Yeah, for sure. SMU is such an interesting point because they're the ones that took kind of the poison pill deal to join the ACC, and that's kind of why, right? Because you get a shot at more of those teams. I remember in 2017 when UCF had a game canceled against North Carolina, who would have been like the 7th or 6th best team on their schedule, and people were saying, well, if they had beaten North Carolina, the rankings would have viewed them more favorably because people know the logo. So a good point there.
Yeah, and I do think that they're still getting the group of 5 treatment in a way.
Yep.
If you kind of think about it, but
the situationship with the ACC,
it is a situationship with the ACC. Maybe a situationship. Rhett Lashley and SMU gonna be an interesting candidate to throw out there if some of these jobs open up. Maybe some Auburn fans holding out hope that Rhett Lashley is the coach in waiting there. But I do think that seeing all of that SEC representation, what was it, 8 SEC teams in the top 25? I mean, even Mizzou getting in there as well. And meanwhile, the Big Ten has obviously 4 teams at the top, 4 teams that are currently sitting in the top 10. But where are those quality wins going to come for a team like Penn State? And if Indiana doesn't get that win against Ohio State, could they be in a little bit of potential trouble there? So, yeah, I think the SEC is still sitting in a spot where I'd be surprised if they didn't have 4 in. It might be too early to say that. A lot of stuff's going to happen in this last month. But the SEC right now feels like the best bet to be able to get 4 teams into the field, which I would look at the Big Ten and wonder if 3 is a little bit more likely.
Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't get much funnier, right, than your 14, 15, 16 of A&M, LSU, and Ole Miss, which is, we have no idea what's going on here. Yeah, LSU beat Ole Miss, A&M smoked LSU, but if we played 10 games per Hugh Freeze, I don't know who would win out of those 3. I literally said that at the time. So, and Alabama's up there just because they haven't played a good offense in a minute. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, and Bama gets the benefit of the doubt because of the Georgia win, obviously, and that's clearly bolstering them past a 1-loss team like SMU. Although I would kind of tend to push back on that a little bit, and don't give me the who would win on a neutral site.
We have no idea who would win between Alabama and SMU on a neutral site. We thought we knew about USF till that 4th quarter or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. If I told you that Vandy beat Alabama on any site, you would say, all right, well, let's throw that logic out the window. But yeah, so it's good to have the playoff rankings back. I just, I love, just getting mad online on a Tuesday night. That's just what we do now. So we will, when we do all of our preview pods moving forward, I will reference all of these rankings as well, and I will default to those instead of the AP poll. So if you hear a ranking, it is a playoff ranking. It is not an AP poll ranking. I know that gets a little bit murky. Just like Wikipedia switches over. If you look up a team's a team's page for that specific year, Wikipedia will switch over to those rankings once the playoff ranking starts. That's why I just go, like, a lot of time if I'm just referencing the AP poll or something like that, I'll have to go on Football Reference so as to not confuse myself. I wonder, is that an AP poll ranking? Is that a playoff poll ranking? Henceforth, only playoff rankings on the Saturday Down South podcast.
Well, you know what's crazy too, because I'm with that and I agree with that, but here's where they get me. I believe like the college football playoff does not do a final ranking, right? They just give you the team and say, here you go.
It's the final ranking. It counts as the final ranking before the playoff, but they don't do a postseason ranking.
Right. So we technically have to default to the AP again at the end of the year to go, well, look, they finished at 15 because the CFP just goes, all right, well, we're not ranking anything else.
Football Reference has you covered there as well.
There you go.
Because they include the final college football playoff ranking and the final AP ranking if you look at like the team history page. So yeah, that's what we will be doing. Great pod coming up, by the way. Jacob Hester, you might have heard of him. He is going to join us A certain Alabama LSU game might come up. Might just talk about Dylan Sampson the entire time. A lot of stuff with Hester, as always. And we have just a really, really solid Week 11 slate in the SEC. Every single game technically has SEC championship implications because every single game involves a team in the SEC with 2 or fewer conference losses. So I stand by that. They all matter. They're all significant.
Yeah, I love it.
You don't seem like you love it, Will.
No, I'm trying to do the math here. You're so right. Yeah, Vandy's technically an SEC contender because they have some fun tiebreakers, don't they?
I mean, I'm just saying. Just only 2 losses in conference play. Diego Pavia still thinking playoff in his sights. All right, let's start.
I think we got to start basically now just putting you in the little Harry Potter closet and working on those tiebreakers. That's my only note here is that, buddy, those tiebreakers, you were so right about that in the preseason with no Alabama, Georgia, Texas at the very top like we were expecting. This is going to get dicey and somebody's going to get left out.
Can I be honest? It's too early. It's too early for me to go down all of these rabbit holes. I'm going to wait. I think because we have 14 weeks now, I think I'm going to do something for it going into week 13. That might sound like it's really late, but it's not as late this year. And we're going to have a little bit more figured out. Obviously, not everybody in the SEC plays a conference game going into that final weekend. Maybe post week 12 into week 13. We'll have something related to tiebreakers, who you should be rooting for, how in the world we're going to figure all this stuff out, because a lot of this will sort itself out over the course of the next 2 weeks, and we'll have a much clearer picture of it.
For sure.
All right, Florida. Number 5, Texas. Texas, 21.5 point favorite. The over-under I have. 0.5 snaps for DJ Lagway. Great news. Just to hear that the hamstring injury isn't as bad as initially feared, according to Billy Napier. He is not ruling out the idea of being able to play against Texas. Brutal spot to be in if the trainers at Florida leave this up to Billy Napier. That would be awful, because if he gets hurt and aggravates that injury against Texas and plays and defies kind of the odds and the optics of last week, Billy's getting blasted for rushing him back, and you're not beating Texas. That's just it'll be obvious if and when that happens. I hope that does not happen.
You're so right. And I just went through the full thing of emotions of going, wow, it's come to this where I'm really rooting for DJ Lagway and hoping he plays. And I went, wait, I might not be rooting for DJ Lagway hoping he plays because, Texas's defense is awesome. They have great pass rushers. They're a very physical defense. And the Florida line's not been great. And so, to your point, that's never what we want to see, especially in college sports, which is a coach fighting for his job with a kid between him and kind of in the middle. It's a rough situation. You don't want that to be up to the player. You honestly don't want to be up to the head coach.
Yeah, unique because he is fighting for his job. And this is a true freshman quarterback who has a bright future. And I don't know, it's a little bit different when your next best option is a Yale transfer. Did you know that Aiden Warner went to Yale? I don't know if it's gamesmanship at all with Napier, but at the same time, I'm not going to be surprised if DJ Lagway, the Texas native, wants to play in this football game. Back in his home state, he's like, look, I feel like I want to fight for my coach. I want to do whatever I can. Tape me up. I don't think you could tape a hamstring. I don't know how that works. They've got tape for everything these days. Maybe they do. I don't know. I don't think you could truly rule out the idea of DJ Lagway playing. I would have never in a million years thought that was on the table on Sunday. With the optics of getting carted off the field, everybody's around you, and Billy calling it at halftime a significant injury to a prize quarterback. I would doubt that we're going to have any sort of insight on this until probably some sort of Pete Thamel tweet, maybe an hour or two before this game. That would be my expectation moving forward. It could be a true game time decision. Get out there, see if this hamstring tape that I've just talked up works for you and you feel like you can actually move. I don't know. But either way, it's a brutal task. It is a brutal task for the Florida quarterback against this Texas defense, who, by the way, is coming off of a bye week. Texas this year, these rankings, coming off of games against Carson Beck, who is what he is in 2024, but Diego Pavia as well, part of that sample size worth remembering. Texas's defense this year is number 1 in FBS in yards per play allowed. They're number 1 in FBS in passing yards per game allowed. Number 1 in FBS in passing TDs per game allowed. You know what? I'm tired of saying number 1 in FBS. Just assume it's number 1 in FBS until I tell you that it's not. They're also number 1 in quarterback rating allowed. They're number 1 in 10-yard pass plays allowed. Number 1 in 20-yard pass plays allowed. Number 2 in FBS in scoring defense. Number 2 in FBS in red zone TDs allowed. Texas
Surely
defense
this
good.
must be the best defense in the SEC, right, Connor? If they've had another defense on their home turf, they'd be the best defense.
You know, on that day, on that night, Texas was not the best defense on its own field. Georgia very much earned that title for what they did in Austin. But yeah, it's kind of weird.
I've got to where I could hear the Georgia fans in the back of my head. They're barking. So I had to let you know. Because you're right. I was with you about PK. They're having an amazing defense. For a night, though. We can't forget about Georgia.
It's kind of weird. You could look at a lot of different metrics and probably make a case for 4 different SEC teams as having the best defense. Like, who's the best on their best day? Yeah. Georgia would probably have that title. Tennessee right now is number 1 in Max Olson's stop rate, which I think is still really significant. Ole Miss gets in the backfield way more than anybody else in the SEC. We're going to get to that in a bit. And obviously they're top 3, top 5 in a lot of these metrics. So you can kind of pick and choose in a lot of different ways, but Texas certainly part of that conversation without a doubt. We're late enough into the season where I don't think you can just strictly look at quarterback play and say that it's benefited just because of that.
Yep.
And if they're going to see Yale transfer Aiden Warner in this one, favorable. He's going to have a banged up backfield. Unfortunately, Trey Wilson, an injury riddled season for him. The guy expected to be Florida's number 1 receiver this year, he is out for the season. If you're a Florida fan, you're just wondering, is there a path? What in the world is the path at Texas as a 3-touchdown dog? I think there's a path, and it's pretty obvious. We're not necessarily coming up with anything revolutionary by saying this. It's turnovers. 100% Quinn Ewers turnovers. Easier said than done. If Florida is still without its top 3 defensive backs like it was at the end, or I shouldn't say top 3, but starting defensive backs like it was at the end of that Georgia game. But Texas has thrown 14 picks this year. And again,
you got to get after them early. That's the key. If you don't have a first or second drive pick against Quinn Ewers, you just pack it in.
Texas is the ace pitcher who once they settle in, you're in trouble. It's going to be 6 or 7.
They give up the leadoff home run. They settle in. You better get your damage early.
You better put up that crooked number in the first frame. If you don't, it's going to be some tough sledding. It might be a long night at the dish. I think that Florida has to capitalize on that. And I think it could. I think we could actually see Florida keep it close in the first half. And it's another one of those Texas home games where you're kind of just wondering, when's Texas going to turn it on? When are they really going to pull away? And maybe it's something like 14-10 at the break. And Ewers has thrown 2 picks without a fully healthy version of Isaiah Bond, who is hoping to be able to return for this one. I'm still taking Texas to win, but I'm going to go 28-13 and say that this is another instance in which Florida shows fight, just kind of like what it's been doing the last month and a half here. But it's pretty obvious by day's end, they just don't have enough dudes. They just don't have the depth that you need to pull off an upset like this.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And I mean, Florida's defense, I previewed it coming into the last game. They weren't super turnover prone. They're good at other things. Luckily, they played Carson Beck, so they now look turnover prone in the aggregate. They are playing Quinn Ewers, very similar type of lad. Their game was a masterclass in how to not protect the football with Georgia and Texas played. So I agree. I think they'll have at least a pick or 2. Florida, you're not going to win this game with your third string quarterback in Austin, right? I'm not trying to break any
Yale
news
transfer.
here.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Winter Park legend.
Yeah.
Look, you got 3 games after this. 1 or 2 of them are winnable. Okay. So the big thing you can't do, I know I hit on it earlier, but the big thing you can't do is go trot Lagway out there, have some optically horrible moment that ruins your season. All right. Lose this game. Just go lose it. And then start over. You got 3 games. If you go 2-1, you probably save your job. If you go 1-2, depending on how you win the 1, you might save your job. Winning Texas, probably not in the cards, just because, to your point about depth, this is a top 5 team. You played Georgia close and should have had them, but the quarterback play stopped you there, already within the context of a game where your defense was playing well. So I think you got to just win the war instead of the battle here, because, and this is like a wedge issue for me. We've talked about it a little bit, but I Dennis Allen, I was out on him from the time that he played Jameis Winston hurt against the Bucs, like week 3 of year. I was out, and I've talked about Saban playing 2 up 38-0 against Mississippi State. That's just one of those things I do not play with. Like I just think it's not fun to get your guy out there when you don't really, when you don't need to. So if he's nursing an injury, so point being, focus on these next couple of games. If you give Texas a run for their money, cool. But all your goals are technically still in front of you, not to win the SEC, but to survive another year, keep Lagway. And the key for keeping Lagway is not to get him re-injured.
I think the optics of that would just be so bad. You know how this works. I mean, it would immediately fall back on Napier, even if there was some sort of a closed door meeting where Napier says, "Man, I can't trot you out there," and Lagway just gives this impassioned speech of, "Coach, I want to fight for you. I want to do right by you. Let me test it. Let me see what it's like pregame, and then we can make that decision. But just give me the chance to be able to travel. Give me the chance to be able to suit up for this one." And then the mojo's going, and Billy's like, "All right, kid, I put all my eggs in your basket anyways. Might as well do it one more time. Let it ride." I would
start the game. Have him do a handoff. How about that? Start Lagway. Have him do a handoff. Get him out of there. Compromise.
Just the fact that it was non-contact makes me worry so much, Like, and I get that it's not as serious as they initially feared, and that is great. And I hope that we see more DJ Lagway in 2024 if he is right. But yeah, that would just be disastrous. I would just hate to see that for all parties involved. That would just be brutal. But yeah, this is not a Texas. Do not let Florida hang around. Do not let Florida hang around with the way that they have been feeling. They have played like a team with nothing to lose, except when it came to going for 2 at the end of Tennessee, in which case they tightened up at the worst possible moment. But I would, if I'm Texas, I am hoping that those first quarter turnover issues do not surface once again against Florida.
Yeah, and I mean, again, like I've always, not always, I've made some jokes at Florida's expense, right? At this point, I am rooting for the storylines, right? Like I said, I think their season's still on the table. I'm not trying to root against Florida or do any of that stuff. So don't take it as that. I like watching Lagway play, and I want him to be a great player. That's it. And so, yeah, I think at the end of the day, like I said, just take the schedule loss here and move on. Like, you can win a couple of these next games, and I genuinely am rooting for them because I want to see how this goes. I've never seen this before, where a defense turns around the way it has here, and now we got the quarterback situation. So fascinating. Let's keep the season going.
Yeah. All right, let's go to number 3 Georgia, 2.5-point favorite on the road. Number 16 Ole Miss. Man, this is going to be a good one. Over under I have pretty obvious here. Will 3 Carson Beck picks.
Yep.
That's look, 2 consecutive games with 3 picks, 3 consecutive games with multiple picks. Last time that Beck
What improvement from last game if he has 3 picks?
How is that improvement from 3 picks
4.
last game?
He had 3. He had 3? My bad. Sorry, I was counting.
You just steamroll, Mike. I had 3 picks in consecutive games. I get that stat wrong on the over-under. What are we doing?
You're so right. I counted the one we threw right to the DB. You're so right.
I think he would have had 2 picks on the same drive then, so it still would have been 3
point.
picks.
You're right.
Yeah.
Sorry, my bad.
3 picks. We're not going to add it.
You're right.
He doesn't need any more picks to be added to his total. It's already at 11. Mm-hmm. The last time that he had fewer than 2 interceptions in a game was October 5th against Auburn. It's been a month. That's not great. Dating back to Bama, 11 of his picks and all 11 come in the last 5 games. Mm-hmm. Not ideal. I did a little bit of digging because this is a question that I think Georgia fans are wondering about. I think college football fans as a whole who are wondering about how vulnerable Georgia is are wondering about this question. How mistake prone can Carson Beck be for a Georgia team that wins a national championship? Because at this point, the 2024 version of Carson Beck is this. It is unrealistic to expect him to just flip the switch and stop turning the football over. Okay? Like it's going to happen. I went back to every post-integration national champ.
Which is a big deal for Ole Miss.
That doesn't include Ole Miss. 1970.
Ole Miss is out of the running if we're talking about that.
Yeah, Texas is always my cutoff. They won the last They won the last segregated national championship. Texas did. So the most interceptions thrown by a QB1 on a title team that I could find. Any guesses?
Oh man, that's still old school football. I'm gonna say
it's actually not.
Oh man, yeah. I'm gonna say let's be generous to their chances here. We're at 11. I'm gonna say 15.
Deshaun Watson had 17 picks
Okay.
in 2016 when Clemson went on. Albeit a 15-game season, it's a little bit different than when you used to have to play 12 games. So that's part of it. But what I thought was a bit more relevant to trying to account for the changes to the sport, because things have just changed in football. There used to be a lot more interceptions, but the volume of passing is also different now than it was before. I thought that looking at pass attempts per interception was a little bit more relevant.
That's great job there, because I literally just did that method. I was like, but there were so many fewer games when Archie was running around and stuff. But you're right, there are more pass attempts, so it all kind of even out. Great point. Yeah.
So obviously, the higher the number here, the more pass attempts per interception, the better. That means you're not as mistake prone. If you're at 99 or 100 passes per interception, like 2018 Trevor Lawrence was when Clemson won that national title, 2020 Mac Jones was that year, you're in good shape. Carson Beck is currently at 26.4 attempts per interception. Not great. Deshaun Watson, 2016, he was at 34.1 in 2016. But go back and look at the year he had, because he had the interceptions, which was an issue, and it was definitely a talking point throughout that season. Can this continue? But his good was so good that he was still second in the Heisman voting. Yep. He was still an awesome player. He could still turn to his legs. They really turned to his legs a lot more down the stretch, and that was kind of the adjustment that they made after that Pitt loss. And I think he threw he had 70 pass attempts in that game. It was something ridiculous. And then Pat Narduzzi kisses his kicker as he makes the game winner. Just an all-time weird, but also at the same time peak Pat Narduzzi game that was. And Clemson ends up winning the national title that year, even though this really was a trend throughout the entire season. It also helped Deshaun Watson that he had a Clemson defense that was top 5 in yards per play allowed, so they could kind of bail him out of some of these spots. There's actually a closer national champ QB comp to Beck in terms of that attempts per interception stat, if you're wondering. Any sort of guesses if you haven't looked ahead at my notes here?
I did, unfortunately.
Okay, so you know this then. 2003 Matt Mock, 25.6 attempts per interception. The difference is that LSU team in 2003, they ran the ball with a lot more success than Georgia, which is rare to call the Georgia running back room kind of a liability, but they were averaging 54 rushing yards per game better there, and it was the number 1 scoring defense in America, led by the best coach in the history of the sport. You get it. The guy had guardrails. You could afford some of these interceptions at times. This thing with Carson Beck feels different. It just does. Kirby has never had a team that averaged more pass attempts per game than rushing attempts. This Georgia team is averaging 7 more pass attempts than rushing attempts, in part because, look, you built the offense around Carson Beck. You spent in the transfer portal to get receivers to come in. That was supposed to be the strength of this team, and the backfield depth with some of the injuries that they've endured during the season is probably not helped. And if you're trying to, play a 16-game season, 17-game season, you need to have running back depth, and that has been a little bit tougher for Georgia to come by. TBD on the Trevor Etienne rib injury, if that's going to limit the backfield even more down the stretch. So all of that is relevant heading into this week against an Ole Miss defense.
I do want to say, and that's why I didn't want to cut you off about that, because I actually the thing about Matt Mock is so interesting to me, because that was prime Jimbo Fisher, where he was slinging that thing. But to your point, it was still ground and pound defensive team. And I think that you've hit on that, which is that if Georgia had this, physical between the tackles running game, that was what was so weird about that LSU team, was that they took all these chances that were just let your guy make a play, but they were we don't it was kind of the inverse of what you would imagine a Saban and a Jimbo team being, which is we're controlling this game by running the ball. Let's throw it up. And whereas Georgia needs to throw the ball. That's why I really honestly don't fault Beck as much as I would fault that offensive gameplay for LSU, which obviously worked, but they were just trying to score bonus points some of the time.
Yeah, you're right. This is a different situation for Georgia. They have to be able to throw the ball, especially if you're not going to get these home run plays in the ground game. Mm-hmm. That has just not been an element of this offense yet. And you need sometimes you need to be able to hit on that 30-yard pass play and make life a little bit easier. And you can't necessarily expect to have this perfect success rate on third down. And sometimes you just got to hit a big one. And that the passing game has been pretty much responsible for getting those chunk plays in Mike Bobo's offense. But, you wonder, all right, well, what does that mean against this defense? What does it mean against this Ole Miss defense that is certainly in the discussion for best defensive line in all of college football? The most absurd stat for this Ole Miss defense, they have 17 more TFLs than any FBS team. 17 more. It's crazy. I mean, they have these games where it's like, oh yeah, 15 TFLs for Ole Miss. And that's just become kind of the standard. They will get in this Georgia backfield. And if they don't, Ole Miss doesn't have a chance. Okay? And sure, Jared Ivey might hurt his knee every other play in a non-faking injury sense. I actually do think he gets hurt like every other play, it seems like. He's awesome and he's great. I've been hyping up Jared Ivey for a while since he transferred over from Georgia Tech. But man, it feels like every time he's involved in a tackle, Jared Ivey's slow to get up. Oh, Jared Ivey's holding his knee. Ole Miss fans, you get it. But here's the crazy thing. After all the preseason conversation we had on this show, anytime you talk about this Ole Miss team, we talked, can they get those guys on the defensive line that can slow down Georgia in this Carson Beck offense after he carved them up for 52 in Athens last year? All right.
Yep.
Half 100 between the hedges. He did that against Ole Miss. That's actually the thing I'm most confident about in this matchup is that Ole Miss's defensive front is going to make life difficult for Carson Beck. And if you would have told any Ole Miss fan that in the offseason, they would have said, boom, get us to the playoff. We're thinking potential national championship contender. Let's go. I would expect more Carson Beck turnovers in this game. And yes, I said turnovers, plural. I would bank on that. I would expect Ole Miss's defensive additions to continue to be worth all of that NIL money, which they have been so far this year for the most part up front. But I'd be more worried about this Ole Miss offense. I realize that's a strange thing to say about a group that just put up 63 and was doing video game things on that Arkansas defense. It's also a group that's battling some pretty significant injuries right now with Henry Parrish Jr. out. Caden Priest-Corbin was out for that Arkansas game, and obviously all eyes are going to be on the availability of Trey Harris. What does it look like for him if he does return? It's first time we're seeing that guy in basically a month since the LSU game. If I'm guessing, Trey Harris plays. Will he be at full go? I don't know. You can beat Georgia deep. This isn't – I don't think it's been an All-American type season for Malachi Starks either. And maybe not enough people are talking about that. But if you look at some of these busts that they've had, even the bust in the Florida game, you're just like, man, he's got his eyes peeking in the backfield too much. He has not had a vintage Malachi Starks season in the way that many expected to. But at the same time, this defense is not 2022 levels of exposed on the back end, where even Garrett Nussmeier was like, buddy, I can chuck it deep against this group in the SEC championship. And he was taking all of those chances. And we wondered if that was going to prevent Georgia from winning a national championship. That did not prove to be the case. But that's what I can't bank on. I can't bank on Jackson Dart getting enough time to be able to stretch the field. I don't know that he will be able to navigate his way behind what should be a healthier Georgia defensive front. I think a healthier Mykel Williams is the difference in this one. He played 41 snaps against Florida and wasn't just obvious passing situations like it was against Texas. I think this is the game where we go, oh yeah, Mykel Williams, top 10 pick. There's a reason we were talking about this guy and all that potential. And it's a game where you're reminded that you can be the portal king, which Lane Kiffin is, but if you're not developing on that offensive line, you're in trouble. I think after Ole Miss races out to an early lead in this one, it can't put the game away because it can't run the football. And Georgia gets a late drive from Carson Beck after multiple interceptions, and Georgia wins this game 28-27.
Man, this matchup feels like it's gotten it started off in the offseason being interesting, and it feels like with every week there's been like a new layer to the possibilities of what this game could be, right? With teams showing, honestly, both teams have shown more flaws than we thought, right? I don't think there's anything that either team is doing better than we expected them to do.
Ole Miss defensive line.
Ole Miss defensive line is doing better, but they were seen as a huge strength, right? With all the guys they brought in and all that.
They were seen as a group with massive potential. Yes, yep. The Walter Nolan edition changed how we were talking about them. If it had just been Oman Mielen, I think it's a little bit different, and Chris Paul Jr. as well. But I think, and I should really say the Ole Miss front seven, not just the defensive line. But
right.
I would still say that group has exceeded expectations.
Yeah, and obviously Trey Harris, he was in line with your expectations, but I think he kind of let some people know. And so just to kind of sim through all of that, because we've all more or less been here, right? If we got 100% healthy Trey Harris, I could see him frolicking through the Georgia safeties. That is something that is easy for me to imagine. Now, we've seen other guys in Ole Miss step up for sure, but Trey Harris is a difference maker. And I think that once you get to this level of kind of banged up where you're just never right within the context of a football season, and you're a player who's good at deep routes, getting open, leaving people in the dust. It'd be one thing if it was like a tight end or like a Michael Thomas style receiver that would just catch the ball and go down kind of. But I will say that to say, if we were looking at this game logically, if we were doing some, exit polls and tabulation, it would feel like, Ole Miss has a lot of things that I would like about this game. And I'll give you one specific example. Remember last week I said, hey, Tennessee is pretty much better than Ole Miss at everything but quarterback play, but that quarterback play matters. I then proceeded to not pick Ole Miss. Last week, Jackson Dart was able to basically just go Super Saiyan. On a field based on what they've shown right now, Jackson Dart is head and shoulders better than Carson Beck.
I would agree with that. I would agree with he's definitely had the better season. Yeah,
I mean, it's not even statistically, eye test, it's not even close. The thing that we didn't like about Jackson Dart was his turnovers, and those are still nowhere near Carson Beck. The thing we liked about Carson Beck was his poise, familiarity with the offense. He's screaming at receivers on third down about not knowing the play, right? So that being said, if you're Ole Miss, it's all going to run through that guy in the D-line. I think you nailed that. I think it's going to be Jackson Dart versus the back end of Georgia's defense, which you've seen has struggled, all right? And Ole Miss's D-line versus Georgia's run game, exactly what you said. They've not found that consistent guy that they can really lean on when it's time to run the ball. Yeah, they can have guys that scoot around. Yeah, they can do in-arounds, double reverses, right. I'm going to pick this one exactly the way I did with LSU Ole Miss and just say, I feel like I've seen this game so many times before. Texas was a version of this game where Kirby's back is against the wall. And I'll say it this way. When these games are close, Georgia doesn't win them. Okay? They don't. They lost the Alabama game after they made it close. When Georgia has a game like this, a la Tennessee 2022, it's kind of a bloodbath. Because, again, like I said, look at Texas. Carson Beck did everything he could to not make that a 30-point win or a 40-point win. This is not a Georgia team that you trust in those moments right now, because their big win has come when their defense has just suffocated Texas on the road. And their quote-unquote big loss has come in a moment where they had all the momentum, right? And their quarterback threw a pick to an 18-year-old. You don't want to be in a close game based on what Georgia has shown at this point with that quarterback. That's a pick we barely even talk about because but so much has happened, but could definitely a low point in Carson Beck's season. So I say that to say, I don't think Kirby Smart loses this game to Lane Kiffin. Everything I know about college football tells me that Kirby Smart shows up with the plus 10 ratings on NCAA for all of his players. Everybody looks bigger, stronger, faster, and it doesn't make any sense. But Ole Miss turtles the way they do against the way they did against Oklahoma. And I understand they didn't do that against Arkansas last week, and a defensive coordinator, Travis Williams, that I respected a ton, and they exposed and carved them up because of how great Jackson Dart was. And today you could talk about the safeties and the similarities here. I get it, but every time Lane Kiffin has been in this situation, he has found a way to turtle and just get shelled. Every time Kirby Smart has been in this situation, not against Alabama, it has gone the same way. So I have to just trust Kirby Smart and say he's still the best coach in the sport. I'm not sure how he's going to win this game, but I think his defense is going to show up. Lane Kiffin's not going to want to be there. And that's what I see in Lane Kiffin in these big moments. That second half against LSU, the second half against Alabama last year, he just does not want to be in these big games. I don't know if he's still thinking about the Florida job because that's a little bit more fluid now. But I can't pick on logic here because that would say like an almost upset. I'm just going to say, how about them dogs?
To your point, so Jackson Dart is definitely had the better season than Carson Beck. And it doesn't make sense to say this, but if it's a last-minute drive and you're wondering who would you rather have?
Neither of these characters.
I'd still rather have Beck. I'd still rather have Beck in that spot.
Based on what? His biggest drives have ended in a fumble and pick to an 18-year-old.
I think I would still argue the and I'm not saying that this negates. Again, I believe that the bad has outweighed the good clearly with Carson Beck. I still think that there have been moments, the drive that he put together down the stretch against Florida to be able to distance that lead when it was a tie game.
Well, they had me playing quarterback. I mean,
Florida. That's not their defense, though. I mean, it's like
who do you 3 picks?
Exactly.
Right.
I'm acknowledging that. I'm fully acknowledging that. I'm saying late game scenario. I would look at even down the stretch against Kentucky when they're playing in a game that they shouldn't have been that close in. Obviously, what was the best play of the night? Well, it's a play in which you're backed up on your own end zone. You're able to hit Dom Lovett on a really nice timing throw in that spot. When if you're that rattled in that moment, you're not making that throw. You're just not. Texas drive. After everybody's
talking
going crazy.
about impressive throws against Kentucky, Jackson Dart might have him there. Remember when he was like going sideways as he hit his guy on 4th down? And like
the Caden Prescorn throw, in the final drive. And then what happened
that was a throw.
What happened after that, though?
I know.
That's more where I would push back on is that you could tell me that Jackson Dart has had 400 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, and Carson Beck's thrown 2 picks, and it's just not looked there. But gun to my head, who would I have more confidence in with a late game scenario? You need to go out and win a football game. God, I think I'm still taking Carson Beck. Is that sick? Is that sick to say?
I think both of these teams would rather not play in a close game. I think is when we just keep going because I'm arguing with myself here because I literally picked Georgia and I'm saying Carson Beck can't do that. I'm saying based on how Georgia's won historically, without Stetson Bennett, because Stetson Bennett win this game going away. Without Stetson Bennett, they have proven we need to get the special teams play like they did against LSU. We need to get the defensive. We need to get a pick 6. We need to get that style of stuff, and I do trust them. I trust Georgia's team to the point where me liking Jackson Dart more than Carson Beck doesn't matter as much. And like I said, Kirby always finds a way. I picked against him, with Texas and with Tennessee. At some point, I have to stop the madness and go, this is Ole Miss. This is Lane Kiffin. You know who Lane Kiffin is. Don't let him win this game.
Yeah. I think Georgia can go 9-3 and make the playoff. I don't think Ole Miss can go 9-3 and make the playoff. Mm-hmm. If you're a Florida fan that wants Lane, a key caveat there. How conflicted are you watching this football game? Pretty conflicted, right? You want Lane to feel like he has maxed out his potential at Ole Miss. Mm-hmm. Whether that's true or not, that's how you want him to feel, okay? And if you want him, that means you want Georgia to win this football game. You don't want Ole Miss going 10-2, getting into the college football playoff, and then all of a sudden that process, like they're going to be playing a game December 21st. I think that's a really big part of this. If you are a Florida fan who wants Lane, if you don't want him, you're going to root against Georgia. I fully acknowledge that. But interesting dynamics all over the place with these two teams for just a juicy matchup that it feels like we've been talking about for a while.
Hey, Connor, who's going to be the leading rusher in this game?
Golly. Nate Frazier? By Nate Frazier?
Sure.
Yeah.
Because is Etienne banged up? Sorry.
Etienne's got the rib injury. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know that he's going to be playing. He wanted to play apparently in the second half of that Florida game. Again, all of this is before availability reports come out. Matt Jones, sneaky leading rusher, the Ole Miss second stringer who has supplanted your boy Ulysses Bentley as a second stringer. Could get some run. Who's that? Dominic Thomas as well could be involved for Ole Miss. Yeah, it's a fair question to ask. No idea. Maybe Jackson Dart going to be the leading rusher in this one.
We have a real case for Jackson Dart here at this point. Anyway,
could be. All right, South Carolina 3.5-point favorite against Vandy. The over/under I have.
Stop doing this, guys. Stop making Diego an underdog. Anyway,
yeah. I was like, wait, what's Will laughing about already? We got a Will laugh.
They just keep making him an underdog, and he keeps covering. It's like, bro, how many times do you have to teach you this lesson?
I'm going to give you some numbers on that in a second here. Mm-hmm. Over/under is 1. Count it. 1 South Carolina sack. That doesn't make sense, Connor. 1 South Carolina sack? That's it? This is the Gamecocks defensive front that, we were talking about. Ole Miss is maybe the best defensive line in all of college football. South Carolina is certainly a part of that as well. They've averaged 3.9 sacks per game. That's third in FBS. Why would I make this such a low over/under? In 5 SEC games this year, Vandy, they've allowed 4 sacks. That's it. Not a high volume passing offense. So yeah, that's part of it. But it just speaks to how unbelievably difficult it is to bring down Diego Pavia. You heard JJ Weaver say it on this very podcast. The guy's just he's small. He's just slippery. He's all over the place. He is confirmed 5'8". It's been harder to bring down Diego Pavia than Jalen Milroe. I mean, think about that. That is wild if you saw those guys standing next to each other, but it's 100% true. Both dual threats, one is better about getting rid of the football than the other. That's just been the case this year. If you're trying to find out why Vandy is in the midst of this turnaround and you want to answer with something more than just Diego Pavia, you're looking for more of a nuanced answer. It's a fun answer and it plays. Lord knows I've said it probably 10 different times this year on different shows. Why is Vandy so different? Here are your key stats, okay? In addition to allowing just 4 sacks in 5 SEC games, Vandy is first in the SEC in time of possession. They bleed the clock. That's what they do. Why are they able to do that? Well, because they convert 46% of their third down. They stay on schedule. They don't have a quarterback that puts them behind schedule, that puts them in these third and long scenarios. It has also turned the ball over, this Vandy offense, just 5 times in 9 games. That's 5th in FBS. That's really good. I think that's a huge reason why Clark Lea's defense doesn't look gassed and overmatched, even though it wasn't like that group had some unbelievable influx of talent and depth. It's not like they went through this facelift in the same way that the Vandy offense did with all of these New Mexico State pieces in. And I think it's obviously part of that is him taking control of this defense, but it's because of this offense setting the table and playing complementary football. But this is all about that third down area. That's when it's money time. You've got a quarterback that can pick it up with his legs. We know that. And you've got an elite tight end in Eli Stowers, who is a unique matchup, and he forces defenses to stay honest. He is number 2 among core 4 tight ends with 154 receiving yards on third down. Just for a little bit of perspective, that's probably not a stat that you're familiar with. I myself had to do a little bit more research on this just to see like, oh, is that really impressive? Or is that kind of like, oh, you'd think maybe the majority of their receiving yards come on third down. Brock Bowers, you know him. Yeah. Guy that said multiple times, best tight end in the history of college football. All right.
Best rookie tight end ever do.
Yeah, certainly in that discussion already. That guy, he never had more than 128 third down receiving yards in an entire season. Eli Stowers already passed that, okay? Last year, no FBS tight end hit 190 third down receiving yards. And you think, why is that? Why is that specific to the tight end position? Well, on third down, you're maybe needing them for some extra protection, or you're not making them the most sure-handed option because you need just somebody that can get quick separation. Maybe defense is bringing pressure, and that's just not typically how tight ends are used. Stowers won't be used like a traditional tight end, and he doesn't need to be used like a traditional tight end because they run a lot of these 2 tight end sets with Cole Spence, who's a lot more of the traditional tight end. 3 pass blocking snaps all year for Eli Stowers. We're getting really nerdy into this, but I think it's a worthy discussion to have. He lines up more in the slot than he does in line. In lines where traditional tight ends line up. By the way, Eli Stowers, in case you were wondering, passed concussion protocol after he took a pretty significant hit on that touchdown he had against Auburn to be able to put that game away. And here's why I bring up all that, okay? Vandy has not faced a team with a defensive line quite like South Carolina's. South Carolina can make you just rethink everything you want to do as an offense. We've seen that time and time again, okay? I think the closest thing that Vandy faced to South Carolina was Texas, which was when Pavia had those rare 2 interceptions. Longhorns, I thought, did a nice job pursuing him really well. Sometimes he made the play, sometimes he didn't. But am I an idiot for listening to all that and picking against Vandy? Because, as you mentioned, Will, Vandy, underdog, again, in all of their core 4 games that they played this year, 6 games against core 4 competition, they've been underdogs every time. And every single time they've covered by at least 13 points. And they're 4-2 outright in those games. Nobody's beaten Vandy by more than 3 points in SEC play. But I'm going to say South Carolina is the first because of what they can do up front and the possibility that the Sellers Rocket combination had to turn the corner game against A&M. Maybe they're not going to do quite what they did against that A&M defense, but I think they can do enough. So I'm going to go South Carolina to win 24-17 against my better judgment. It feels disgusting picking against Diego Pavia, but I just did.
You know me, man. I'm never going to pick against Diego Pavia.
I don't blame you.
And I think the thing here, man, is like we saw a classic good Dowell Loggins game last weekend. We saw a classic good South Carolina game last weekend. You know, this is still that team that struggled mightily against Ole Miss. And I'm not going to say those are exactly equal teams when it comes to pressure up front. You know, I get that. So, sorry. Not pressure up front. When it comes to like the way that they like, let me restart here. Sorry, got 1,000 things on my mind today. when it comes to like the randomness of the season, that's all I was trying to say there, is that like they have had these hot and cold stretches where in the big games they're kind of like the anti of what I would say about like Lane Kiffin, where it's like, okay, you show up in these like big games randomly a couple times a year, but then there are these other games like this that you struggle, like against Vandy, right? And so point being, like I think that usually when South Carolina gets up on this high horse, when they look unbeatable, when their offense is clicking, they have this stinker. Sorry, I lost the plot a little bit, but you see what I'm saying? It's that it's rare for Beamer to truly build momentum in this way, unless, we looked at the end of the 22 season, had another rivalry game, right? Had that moment we had a vulnerable Clemson team. Right now, Vanderbilt is not vulnerable, right? They're fighting for the best Vanderbilt season in recent memory. Every win is something you got to have, right? And I think that when you look at the Vandy schedule, we've talked about, what's still on the table. Technically, Vandy is still like Diego Pavia fully believes he's going to win the SEC this year. And I don't think he's going to let South Carolina stop him. And you're right about the pressure to an extent, but it's about being a sackable quarterback. And the reason why Diego Pavia is a great college quarterback is because he kind of has a little bit of that like Russell Wilson, like infielder mentality where he's hard to tackle. He's elusive. So when you look at like a Jalen Milroe, a guy that has been trying to step in the pocket more, he's been less mobile on his feet. The thing about Diego Pavia is he's always moving, okay? And he's going to get going a direction. He's going to run like a bootleg to where the D-line is always going to be chasing him. He's never going to be a statue. Now, that being said, under pressure, he will also throw picks. And I think that South Carolina has been great at forcing those. But when it comes to these big moments, I'm going to trust Diego Pavia and that offense over Dowell Loggins and the South Carolina offense because I just think I've seen it enough times. And if we can truly unlock the South Carolina offense like we saw last week, they're going to be scary. I think they did enough to continue this experiment for another year. I think we saw what happens when it all works. But I think it has to be a perfect game plan and really, really high-level execution and a great day by Rocket Sanders for sure, which Rocket Sanders is tired, dog. Rocket Sanders ran for the entire state of South Carolina.
I got more thoughts on Rocket that we'll get to later. A little tease for lad of the week.
Yeah, but that's it. I'm picking Vandy by a tutty, and I think they stay alive in the SEC conversation.
I'm glad that we're hedging on this. I feel it feels good to be split. I don't want us both to be anti Pavia. Look, I don't need his brothers finding out who we are, and it's I don't want to cross that bridge. I've been nothing but pro Pavia my entire time talking about him this year after the Virginia Tech game. Of course, obviously, I've never picked against him once, so this is very new for me. But yeah, this is and Vandy like coming off of clinching bowl eligibility. Are like what's still in front of you? What are you still trying to be able to work towards? Because we talk about like Pavia feeling like they can still get into the college football playoff. What does that mindset look like? Does it look like a team that is, because it's riding high in its own right, much like South Carolina is, who is able to handle that success better? That will be the test on Saturday in Nashville. Mississippi State, number 7, Tennessee. Tennessee, 24-point favorite. The over-under I have is 5 Tennessee pass plays of 20 yards. In SEC play, Mississippi State has allowed 27 such plays in 5 games. That's an average of 5.4 per contest. Not good. Not good at all. This is the Vols passing game. This is the passing game's most favorable matchup since they beat Kent State by roughly 5 billion points. Yep. And we were all surprised that Kent State wanted to play the second half without a running clock. And we're like, Kent State, what are you doing? It's 65-0. You're not trying to impress anyone. This is just going to hurt you. I think we're kind of past the if not now, then when point for the Tennessee passing game, at least to think that it's going to be an elite passing attack, right? I think we've seen enough now to realize it can get better, but to think that it's going to be what it was early in the season, that's just not going to be in the cards. Heupel praised the way that Nico played against Kentucky, how he was more decisive. I won't disagree with that. I thought he looked better after, the offense still only put up 7 points in the first half. But the deep ball just hasn't been there yet. And it wasn't there against Kentucky either. They had the 31-yard pass play to Kitzelman, the tight end, on the opening drive, but that was a 16-yard throw that he had some room to run. Those still count as explosive plays. That's good. You'll take those. But if we're talking about rising above the Joe Milton downfield passing attack from last year, you show it against a defense like this, in theory, especially as you're getting healthier at receiver, which Tennessee appears to be. Vols have 6 30-yard passing plays in 5 SEC games. It's 1.2 per game. Even last year's group with Joe Milton averaged 1.6 per game in SEC play. That number was over 2 with Hendon Hooker both of his years as a starter. Nico has not been Hendon Hooker yet. Okay? I think we all agree on that at this point.
Mhm.
Maybe he's got some confidence back after a more inspiring performance against Kentucky. Got to see it in this one. I'm going to leave the door open for Mississippi State to hang around a bit because, again, 7 first-half points for the Vols in their last 4 games would suggest that this could make the home crowd a bit uneasy. I think they're very familiar with that. Definitely picking Mississippi State to cover, but I'm going to go 31-14 Vols. And I suppose there's a bit of an upset. That's kind of roll the dice as well, because to say 31 points means Tennessee's going to make a field goal. Max Gilbert won for his last 6. Not great. Keep that in mind for a Tennessee team that's developed a propensity for playing in some of these closer games, but do not expect it to be decided by a field goal down the stretch against Mississippi State.
For sure, yeah. This is a game that I feel like, honestly, both teams would rather us not super get into because we're just simming the season for Mississippi State. We're focusing on the positive. I will say, the same thing that we said about Georgia when they played Mississippi State here rings true, which is that you got to find out what you're going to do well against Mississippi State. For Tennessee, they've been a vertical offense. I can't say deep ball without thinking of Xavier Legette now. I'm not going to do the voice. But every time I hear the word deep ball, I think of him. But point being,
just in general, in any football sense,
he just says it so perfectly. I know you hate when I do voices, but the way he says deep ball, I just put it in there, kind of like Minimos. Anyway, so point being, he got benched, by the way. Anyway, so point being, even, we saw Carson Beck throw for like 460 against this Mississippi State defense. I think this is where you got to let Nico just go out there and sling it. I think you got to just say, hey, even if you throw a couple picks, even if you look rattled out there, even if Dylan Sampson's awesome, I really do not want to do I don't want to eat into Dylan Sampson's prime time workload here.
Agreed.
I think Nico's arm could use a little stretching. He doesn't have these 30 and 40 pass attempt, 50 pass attempt games we're seeing across the SEC. I think we give him that no matter what in this game. If I'm Heupel, I say you need to just run plays. You need to just go out there and just make your reads. You shouldn't have to care if you throw 3 picks, but I just need you to see guys covering your routes poorly so that you can make the right decision. And again, Mississippi State, shout out to them. They're rebuilding, but this is what you should do as, this top 10 team in Tennessee that has been hanging out all year. What are they going to be? Somehow you got a tune-up game this late in the season. Don't blow it. I got Tennessee.
Yeah. If you're Josh Heupel, you got to be watching that Dylan Sampson workload. 20 carries, I believe it was, in the second half of that game after it looked like he was in the doghouse post-fumble. And I know that you want him to be the main focus of your offense. And if it's tough to get away from that, if it's 7-3 and the home crowd's getting restless and Nico looks rattled, but I agree with you. I think you got to figure it out. You got to get some of that mojo back, and to put 2 maybe solid passing game performances together would bode well for you down the stretch. And if it can preserve the main focus of your offense and Sampson, then obviously that would be an added bonus.
Yeah, I think exactly your point. This is the first time in a 24-point spread that I've said, you got to wear your quarterback's arm out. Don't run the football.
Yeah.
We need this to look like Kid State from a Tennessee perspective. It needs to look like, hey, we're back on schedule, all that. Don't look at the man behind the mirror. You have your quality win against Alabama. You got a gift and a tune-up game here. Just treat it like that and live with the picks, and it's going to look rough, and people are going to make fun of you, but who cares if you throw picks? You're trying to win the SEC.
Yeah, throw 30, 35 times in this game, which is high volume for the Tennessee offense. All right, number 11, Alabama, 3-point favorite. Number 15, LSU. Will's going to be there.
Yeah,
I should have made an over-under with you in mind. Dang, let's auto. Okay, 2 over-unders.
Okay.
Over-under 5 pregame adult beverages consumed by you.
Oh, man. 5. I mean, we're getting started early. You know what I'm saying? So 5 is going to be easy. It's a night game. We'll probably, not that I'll be unprofessional or anything, but if you have a couple to start the day, you're already looking at, hitting the over there on pace.
I wasn't sure if you are. I say this because I've never been to Death Valley with you.
Mm-hmm.
If you are more of I'm going to get my 2-3 early on, sneak a little something into the stadium, then figure it out from there. Or if it's, no, we're going to make sure that we're putting in our work pregame and not necessarily leaving it up in game and then letting results dictate how that's going to go.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I finally have a game day tradition that I love. I get my friends, we tailgate at the house. We're about 15 minutes from Tiger Stadium, my family's house we still have down there. And so we kind of do our thing. We set up some tables and everything. We take stuff outside, set up TVs out there with the joy of Wi-Fi. And then what we do is I always get a parking pass, okay? And John is famously risk averse, so he's usually there with me. So he drives to the stadium. He barely day drinks. He's like a late, or late riser or whatever. So he's usually he's super sober by then. And what we do is we go to the Louisiana Staple drive-through daiquiri shop, right? We all get a drive-through daiquiri, and
Love
then cool part of it is I just heard from Krista, shout out friend of the pod. She's super pregnant, she said, but she's still going to be out there fighting like a warrior for her tailgate, at her tailgate, which is right in the shadow of Death Valley.
The pictures.
It's sickest tailgate I've ever seen. So we will try to stop by there. And once I experienced that for the first time, I was like, look, I'm going to try to make this happen every time. Usually we're kind of like either one of my buddies is tailgating there, we go hang out with them, or we just walk into the stadium and just kind of pregame it. But I think, as long as they'll have me, that's going to be a fixture whenever I go to LSU games. This is my first Bama game in 10 years. So I'm really excited. Didn't miss much. Missed one of them, but I would have had to go to Tuscaloosa. And the Jaden Daniels one, that was a pleasant, happy surprise. So I think in the aggregate, I would have wasted my money if I saw another one. But yeah, I'm excited. I feel like it's 100 years in Death Valley, first year Kalen DeBoer, new page in the rivalry. So I'm excited.
All right, so over's gonna hit for you, definitely. Yeah. I'll take closer to 8, I guess. That probably would have been a better number. All right, over under 4 references to elimination game. Any sort of win or go home, elimination, do or die, all or nothing. You get what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I was told that the regular season was going to be killed with the 12-team playoff. This game is only significant because of the 12-team playoff. Okay, and I get it. It's still significant. Bama hates LSU. LSU hates Bama. I mean, from a national perspective, this is a pair of 2-loss teams that would likely be on the outside looking in with the other format. I mean, this game is monumental in the new 12-team playoff era, the divisionless SEC, all those things as well. I don't think either of these teams have a path with 3 losses. I don't. And I realize Bama still got, the Georgia win, but I think Bama would have too many teams blocking them for an at-large bid. Like LSU and Tennessee, those 2 teams would still be ahead of them. Obviously, if Bama were to lose this game and you're talking about 9-3 getting in, I just don't think they would have enough of those quality wins and too many teams keeping them out. And as we saw with the first rankings, A&M is going to block LSU. And if you lose to Bama, that's potentially another blocking team at large. Bama would be for LSU. LSU could actually get double blocked because Notre Dame is blocking A&M right now, and A&M is blocking LSU right now. So that's complicated.
Disrespecters,
yeah, big time troop disrespecters, as we talked about.
Yeah, we'll give up their seat on the bus for A&M. They're like, no, get out of here, veterans.
If someone's listening to this out of context on just the YouTube clip, they're going to be like, Notre Dame disrespects the troops? What are you guys talking about? No, just look at their schedule this year. Look at what they've done against teams that have troops as part of their identity. But you get it, all right? The losing coach of this game has a long offseason ahead. Mm-hmm. You're going to hear about blown opportunities, how much it's going to sting, that, both of these teams probably, if they lose this game, they're going to have to watch multiple rivals playing in the playoff. That's not going to be fun. That's going to be the toughest pill to have to swallow. It's one thing when it's the 4-team playoff and you got to watch Georgia in there or something like that, but it's totally different when there are several and you're not invited to the party. Not fun. Trust me. Take it from experience. Bama hasn't endured a 3-loss regular season since 2010. Saban, at that time, if you recall, he had already earned just a little bit of grace by the whole winning a national championship the year before thing. Kalen DeBoer hasn't earned that grace yet. Okay? He's earned the right to be criticized for how this year's played out, not just because of the fact that Bama's lost 2 regular season games, but how they have lost 2 very winnable games in the state of Tennessee that felt like they were there for the taking. The good news for Bama, this game isn't being played in the state of Tennessee. The bad news for Bama, this is Death Valley at night, where Brian Kelly has never lost in that setting. Can LSU continue that? Or will this group be a bit shell-shocked still after what A&M did to them down the stretch? I realize a bye game in between. That feels like a lifetime ago, by the way. It was like a very, very long time ago. I'd be stunned if the LSU defense looked like what it... Let me phrase that differently. I would be stunned if the LSU defense that we saw down the stretch against A&M looked like that against this Bama offense and the things that Kalen DeBoer would like to do. I don't expect Jalen Milroe to all of a sudden be turned into Marcel Reed. I almost kind of want to throw out what he did last year against LSU, which was impressive, but
against that though.
Say it again.
It was similar to the Marcel Reed thing. Yeah, he was super mobile. He was converting all the third downs, those legs. Yeah.
very different offensive philosophy this year that we have seen. Also, very different LSU defense and their entire philosophy that we have seen. So, again, it's impressive. It's part of his career and what he's done to get to this point. But in terms of like trying to use it as a barometer to predict how this is going to go, I don't really like that. Yeah. I could picture a scenario in which Jalen Milroe puts Bama on his back and comes out on fire like he did in the Georgia game. But I don't think that's the most likely scenario. I think the most likely scenario is that by night's end, Brian Kelly, he's going full Billy Madison. Man, am I glad I called that guy, Blake Baker. That's your guy. He called Blake Baker specifically for a game like this. Can LSU dial up pressure? Can it get a lead? Can it keep a lead? I think it will. Maybe that means throwing the ball a lot down the stretch and being like, hey, look, we can't run the football. We're just going to kind of abandon that, and they're able to connect more in the passing game because they feel more comfortable with that, with the ball in Garrett Nussmeier's hands. But I'm going to say that LSU, even though I don't feel great about that element, I'm going to say LSU puts the game away late. I'm going Tigers 28-24. Will's picking Bama. He's already told me.
No. Luckily, I won't have to deal with I'll be missing the podcast on Sunday, so I can pick whoever. But yeah, I think I think LSU is going to get punched in the mouth to start this game. Based on what we know about both of these coaches, I think that we're going to see some crazy spaceship plays out of Kalen DeBoer, some orbit motion. Guys are going to be playing charades in the backfield. Linebackers are going to be caught looking.
Will receivers be shooting hoops during plays in which they're not getting the ball?
I sure hope so. Okay. It would bode well for our chances. Okay. And so that's kind of the point, though, right? I think they're going to get off to a great start and probably get up 14-0, just to be honest with you, based on what we've seen this year, given that LSU, spit a hole. We've seen LSU have like 8 yards of offense in a quarter against South Carolina. They do not start off well. We've seen this. And Alabama does. They have great game script and all that. Now, that being said, and as much as I don't trust, LSU's run game, Dellinger's hurt, so the run game is going to suffer even more. Some of the decisions by Brian Kelly have always been head-scratching. Look at that Ole Miss game, man. I mean, Tiger Stadium just willed Brian Kelly's ineptitude to a dub. And I think that these coaching staffs at this point are pretty similar, right? I think that it's kind of ironic now that I think about it in the way that Bama and Ole Miss are built. You got your boisterous defensive coordinator who is, with Pete. In Pete's case, he struggled in the past. His name's actually Pete, by the way.
Did you call Blake Baker boisterous?
No. I wasn't talking about Blake Baker. I was talking about Ole Miss. I was talking about
Pete Golding.
Yeah. I was talking about Pete Golding and Kane Womack. I'm comparing them because they're both going to Death Valley. So I think that's the part of the ball that's going to get exposed down the stretch, right? I think that Garrett Nussmeier is a good quarterback. I got to just keep telling myself that after the picks he threw against A&M that were so head-scratching. I mean, there is not a Carson Beck pick. There is not a Jackson Dart pick that is worse than any of those 3 picks that Nussmeier threw. They were horrible. I get that. That was on the road against A&M. Gets a quarterback switch, a new offense, the momentum turn. I think it's going to be the opposite here. To your point, Brian Kelly's undefeated, Death Valley at night. I think that in these big games and these big moments, DeBoer has shown to kind of outsmart himself, and I think that Blake Baker weirdly is a steadying force here. I think that Blake Baker was actually on that LSU staff coaching the linebackers that played well in 2021 against Alabama.
That was a weird game. That was such a weird game, wasn't it? Because we were like, Bryce Young is struggling mightily against a team that's rocking an interim coach O. Well, I guess interim coach O. That should have. Yeah, he was his own interim coach.
He was the interim for himself. Yeah. And so point being, exactly to your point, the things that Marcel Reed does well, Jalen Milroe can do well, and if that's the game plan, we might be in trouble. If it's running sideways, if it's the read option stuff, if it's all the motions, because Jalen Milroe is certainly a better quarterback than Reed. I don't think anybody's going to say that, right? In terms of throwing the ball, making the read, stuff like that. Maybe he trusts himself a little too much, but he is a better processor of the game of football. So when you combine those two things, that's what I've always liked about Milroe and what he did well last year in this game, albeit against the Swiss cheese defense. Now, that being said, the things that LSU's defense does well tend to benefit them against a turnover-prone quarterback and a quarterback who likes to be a statue in the pocket, which weirdly is what Jalen Milroe has become. His bad throws this year have been him not trusting his legs early, getting stuck in a bad situation where his receivers are, playing hopscotch and they're not open, and he has to go try to make something happen, right? And so point being, I think this one is one that will come down to the big moments. Dowell Loggins is not our offensive coordinator as they were with South Carolina. That was a guy that was open at the end of that game. And so point being, I'm going to have to trust Nussmeier that he is the player that I always thought he was and just wipe off last week like a DB or 2 weeks ago against A&M and just say that they've spent a lot of time prepping for this. I don't think Jalen Milroe is going to come out and be the player that he should be in this game. Like I said, what he was last year. I think that DeBoer thinks he's a little bit smarter than what they had going on last year. I think that's going to hurt him. So yeah, I got LSU in this one. And I will say too, the expanded playoff and all that does obviously heavily factor in. But Nick Saban not being the coach of Alabama is why we're here, right? Because at the end of the day, Alabama's probably undefeated under Nick Saban because he lost one game against the state of Tennessee for his whole career. So I think he still beats Georgia if Caleb DeBoer can do it. And he's not losing to Vanderbilt, I'll tell you that much. And Tennessee, good luck. I mean, how'd that go? And so point being, the openness of the SEC is just as much due to Nick Saban not being this, emperor of the SEC as much as it is the expanded playoff and the expanded SEC and all that stuff.
In Saban's 17 years, this game, the winner of this game, 14 times went on to Atlanta, won the division. My guess is that won't happen this year. It very well could because LSU still, if LSU wins this game, would have one conference loss. But the winner of this game, all of a sudden you're looking at it going, boy, 10-2 feels really, really possible. And that's such a great reward for what these teams have done to get to this point and shown some really tough struggles at different moments that just kind of left you scratching your head. And that is the grace of the 12-team playoff, and you can hate that, but that is kind of the reality for both of these teams. And it doesn't mean that the winner of this game is automatically going 10-2, but it does all of a sudden feel like there's a little light at the end of the tunnel. Oh, that's the playoff there. Oh, okay, that is within sights, and that could be very much up for grabs on Saturday night. Just a huge, huge game. One of the most significant games, I think, for the playoff picture so far in shaping it. This will be.
I'm excited. Yeah, I mean, that's the funny thing, right? I mean, no matter what, the winner of this game will have a loss to either Lincoln Riley's USC, right, or Vanderbilt, right? And I'm not dumping on Vanderbilt, but Alabama, you're not supposed to lose to Vanderbilt. So either way, they're going to have a real head-scratching moment. As a Brian Kelly fan, you love the 12-team playoff for the fan part of you because he's going to drop a stupid game early and maybe one late. He's proven to do. And
what's more embarrassing, Will? What's more embarrassing, losing to that USC team or losing to that Vanderbilt team?
I think at the time.
Well, at the time is because obviously we have different context now.
Exactly. At the time, Vandy was worse. I think now USC is definitely worse. But I will say, that both of these coaches have shown they'll drop her in game. So if you win this game, you're definitely not out of the woods for 9-3.
True. Yeah. No, you're exactly right. But it will feel significant, and I love that it will feel significant. Okay, that is really, really good news, even if you are a hater of the 12-team playoff era. All right, Oklahoma, 2.5-point favorite. Number 24. Yeah, that's right. Number 24, Mizzou. The over-under, 5 Drew Pine pass attempts. Oof. Good God, I'm begging for less. Yeah, give me a hard thumbs down on that. I'll take Brady Cook playing this game in a hospital bed over Drew Pine playing at all. And if that's too mean to Drew Pine, look, don't mean to disrespect his family, don't mean to disrespect what he's done to be able to get opportunities at 3 different power conference programs, all right? Notre Dame, Arizona State. Caps, like, I give you all the respect in the world, okay? So I mean this. I mean respect when I say this, but I do not know how in the world Eli Drinkwitz can get in front of a microphone and say that he has confidence in Drew Pine if Brady Cook is unable to go. Okay? If that sounds like I'm being too mean, I would like Drew Pine's unfiltered thoughts after a film session of watching Drew Pine, and then I'd like him to get back to me and tell me if I'm crazy for thinking that, because so far you don't need eyeballs to see it has not gone well.
I'll give you Drew Pine's unfiltered thoughts. Ready?
Drew Pine's smarter than that. Drew Pine's smarter. If you're getting into
not when they snap the ball, brother.
Not when they snap the ball. Drew Pine's smarter than that. He would give you a better thought. I'm going to give him more credit.
Education. He's got a master's degree at this point.
Arizona State kind of balances you out a little bit,
Shout out Matt Berry.
Shout out Matt Berry. Love Matt Berry. Got to have him on. Haven't had him on in a little bit. His schedule's all over the place with them doing the Thursday Sports Center on site and on campus. Really cool to see that. But nonetheless, I really don't want to sign up for the Drew Pine experience. Okay. I know I'm not alone. If he is out there at any point, I'll do the full 180 from what Drink said, and I'll say that I have all the confidence that Oklahoma has already won. I don't care if Oklahoma's trailing. If Drew Pine is in, they're winning that football game. Tons of injuries could determine this. Obviously, Brady Cook's injury as well. Venables left the door open for Farouk and Burks to possibly return to that receiver room. I'm not going to assume anything at this point with those guys. I don't think Jackson Arnold is going to assume anything in terms of guys that he's going to get back. This is a really important juncture for his career moving forward. Remember, this is someone who has still, he's what? We're talking about somebody that's 2 years into his college career and 22 months from being a top 10 recruit, all right, in all of college football, not just top 10 quarterback recruit, top 10 recruit in all of college football. You are trying to show right now that you are good enough for your next OC to want to build around you. That's what this comes down to. And to get to do so at a place like Oklahoma, great opportunity. It would be awesome for him. If you struggle in November, whoever that next OC is, and I assume Brent Venables is going to go big, he better go big, they're going to look at Jackson Arnold and go, nope, let's go get a portal. Let's go get a portal guy. Let's do that. So this is really important for him. I do worry a little bit about Johnny Walker Jr., Chris McClellan, the Florida transfer, kind of harassing Arnold with all of the issues we've seen from this Oklahoma offensive line in SEC play. But I think the best unit on the field is going to be that Oklahoma defense, currently at number 17 in Max Olson's stop rate. That's significant in a game like this. Give me the Sooners by 2 touchdowns, 24-10, in an ugly game that makes us question why Mizzou was ranked in the playoff poll.
Yeah, I think I'm right there with you. I think this is Oklahoma's. Well, again, I'm fully on board with the Brady Cook thing. If Drew Pine is the starter, pack it in, buddy. But that being said, even a hurt Brady Cook could struggle against this Oklahoma defense.
Yep.
And on the other end, if you look at Oklahoma, and when they are able to kind of rumble forward on offense and all that, it feels like Mizzou plays a style of defense. So we've hit on that. Where they're not super aggressive, they kind of hang back in zone. And they don't really have the guys off the edge that they had last year. And, against whatever Oklahoma wants to do, you need time in the pocket because these receivers need time to get open, right? You're not going to snap the ball and have your guy right where you want him. You got to let it develop. You might need a broken play to rumble forward, stuff like that. So if Mizzou had a, suffocating defense that I thought could force a bunch of turnovers and miscues, again, like they had last year, I would feel better about picking Mizzou. But I think that I know that Oklahoma has that. Even in games where Oklahoma's offense has looked completely like they're playing a different sport, Oklahoma's defense has stayed solid for a half, has had pride and talking about specifically against Texas, they forced a big Billy Bowman pick. They were in that game at the beginning, and then Texas
7-3 with 2 minutes left in the first half, 2-3
exactly.
minutes left in the first half.
Yeah. Like their defense will play as hard as they can, until they run out of juice and gas because their offense. And I think that this Missouri defense will do enough to keep Oklahoma's offense on the field, let their defense rest. But yeah, I think that's dudes that deserve better. I think we could put the Auburn defense on there all time. Feels like every year Auburn's defense is there. But Oklahoma is supplanted that title specifically for this year because they got some dudes on that defense, and those dudes are licking their chops thinking about Drew Pine. And furthermore, Brady Cook is not the type of player that he can play at 60% of himself or 70% of himself and not also commit atrocious turnovers.
Could we get Luther Burden third Wildcat if no Brady Cook?
I'd take that. I hate to be like whatever hyperbole, but I would take that over Drew Pine just because he can do one thing. I always say it's like the Hawkins thing that Oklahoma tried for a while. He was a single threat quarterback. Sometimes you got to do that,
Golly, I realized Nate Noel was banged up in the Bama game, but Nate Noel, Marcus Carroll, just rotating Wildcat quarterbacks, direct snap. Let's just do that. That's more fun for everybody. It's not fun. It's not great. But
yeah.
Neither is throwing into just triple coverage and praying that it works out. So yeah, look, I think Oklahoma should be in a nice spot. Mizzou fans kind of realize team hanging on by a thread right now. And yeah, they still get to be part of that conversation as a 2-loss team, but I think everybody's kind of looking at them going, just have not had it this year and maybe a bit too banged up to be able to get some of these nice wins down the stretch. All right, well, bait of the week. Kind of on a roll. Not to brag or anything, but I trashed UCF last week, and then Gus wins that game 56-12. So,
And I failed you because I forgot that was a space game. That's their version of the Death Valley at Night thing. I saw the space jerseys. I went, uh-oh.
Crap, you're right. Uni vibes. Just like how we were talking, like A&M, the uni vibes for LSU. We liked that. We should have listened to it in that one. Yeah, look, keep fading. Keep fading. This is not lock of the week. This is fade of the week. Georgia Tech is getting 11 against Miami. We remember what happened in this game last year. Unbelievable. Wild college football stupidness type finish where Miami fails to take a knee with 33 seconds left, fumbles it. Haynes King rips a 44-yarder. Christian Leary be able to win this game with 1 second left. My guess, and this is just a guess, trying to read the tea leaves, Brent Key's comments, kind of tough coach to decipher. My guess is that he's going to be back in this game. Okay. Georgia Tech is a much, much better team when he is out there. I think we could all agree on that. It doesn't mean that they're going to have enough to beat Miami, but against a Miami defense that's really struggled the last month or so, I would expect Tech's offense to have a big, big day as long as King is out there and at least keep this interesting. Again, like 11 is just kind of a lot when Miami's been playing with fire so much and they trailed a lot in these games. So yeah, it could definitely be a situation where I put my foot in my mouth and I think it's over. And I think Manny Diaz is about to get a big time win against his former school. And then Cam Ward just does Cam Ward things. That could happen again in this one. And I'll be a little bit more patient, but I don't know. I'm going to say 11 is a little bit too much. Maybe that suggests that Haynes King isn't coming back and I'm going to look really dumb for this. If that's the case, that's actually all the more reason to fade this. So you're welcome for that. But Georgia Tech plus 11 is the fade of the week.
We should create a term for this right now. I'm going to call it the Pacific Time Special, which is teams that have the ability to be trailing for like 3 quarters, and then in the fourth quarter they outscore their opponent by like 40 points. It feels like Miami does this every week, like the Alabama against USF game, or even you could argue Georgia against Florida last week, where it's like, oh well, if you were just box score watching, like if you woke up the next day, you were at Pacific Time or whatever, and you were like, because we always joke about that with the Heisman voters, it's like you guys aren't watching all these games. It's like so it's weird because you're right. Miami has played in a ton of close games, but then when you go back and look at like the Cal game, for instance, it's like, wow, they won this convincingly. It's like, well, they really didn't. And so, yeah, I mean, Haynes King, I love that we're like going through the Rolodex. This guy is still in college, man. Good for him. And again, like
forever.
He's and 1-0 in the last year in this matchup. So he's the type of, maybe he was like the original, like the very early prototype Diego Pavia, because he has that little bit of I'm gonna get the crap knocked out of me, I'm gonna convert the third down without the complete product that is Diego. So yeah, you never want to see that type of guy in a game that you're favored.
Throws a lot more interceptions. He's only thrown 1 pick this year, but he's been hurt for part of it, so we can't really say that. But I think he led college football with picks last year, whereas Pavia a lot better with the football. But yeah, just one of those guys that is difficult to bring down and could just be not fun to play against for 60 minutes. All right, let's kick it to Hester. Great to be able to talk all things Bama-LSU, SEC running backs, a little Jimbo conversation. How about that? Much more with Hester. So here's our guy, Hester. Now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is the grittiest guy I know, Jacob Hester. Hester, what's the grittiest thing that you've done in the last month? Because I could come up with 2 suggestions for you right off the bat.
Oh, I see. I like you giving me what you might think it is, because, I never want to be self-serving. Like, I don't want to do that. Like, I want to hear what you think it might be.
Okay. So starters, when we do our Thursday off-campus segments together, I can usually get a pretty good gauge of how fresh you are, and you bring it every single time. Okay. So it's notable when you're not at 100%. You are a push through sickness guy.
Yes.
Correct? 2 weeks ago, it was, I think, that you were nowhere near 100%. Like we're playing like late November, regular season type stuff. And you battled through, and you did probably what, like 8 hours or 7 hours of radio that day? Correct. I mean,
probably
you
7.
were under the weather.
Yeah. Okay. Probably 7. I had very little voice left that day, but I had enough. That's something like my old man would tell me, like, you might not have it all, but you got enough. So yeah, I mean, you got to find a way. You got to find a way somehow.
You went full Reese Davis on us, and it was great. But you actually sound a lot better than Reese, so I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say that. But like Reese, a double header that you pulled off an impressive doubleheader. I didn't even realize that you had this much on your plate on the weekends now as well with what you're doing with LSU radio. But tell the people the Herb Street doubleheader that you willingly pulled off, that you could have gotten out of very, very easily if you had just said, look, I've already got this plan and just done one thing instead of two.
Yeah, certainly not the way that I was raised. Like my parents both just worked, like always worked. They worked graveyard shift, like 11 to 7 type stuff. And so like my grandpa would have to come over and watch us. And so like I always saw my parents work. And so like that part of it, like there's no real excuse. And it's like, yeah, you could have avoided it, but it would have been something where you would have missed a lot of fun. So I didn't want to do that. So on Friday night, I fly from New Orleans to Dallas. I get in late. We wake up early that next morning and we do a big pregame show for Sirius XM right in front of the Cotton Bowl. And that show went up until I believe it was 2 p.m. Central. And so I had about an hour to get to the airport, go through security, get on a plane somehow, some way. My boss at SiriusXM, shout out to Olivia. She had like an Uber waiting on me. So like we get off air.
Dang.
I jump in to that Uber. We go from the Cotton Bowl. Now it would have been closer to go to Love, but they didn't have the flight that would match up. And so I had to go to DFW. So we get there and I fly from Dallas to New Orleans because like if I tried to fly into Baton Rouge, I just felt like that would have been messed up. Game day traffic would have still been there. So direct flight to New Orleans. I get in a car and I go maybe a little bit above the speed limit. And then I tried to pull like a veteran move and it actually worked out in my favor. And all this, by the way, had to go off without any hitch. Like there's no way could I have gotten it done if we'd have arrived like 15 minutes late or whatever. We actually gained 12 minutes in the air. So that was perfect for me. And so I sprint to my car. I'm driving and I had an Uber waiting at my house for me because my house is on the way from New Orleans to Tiger Stadium. And so I had an Uber waiting on me so I could park my car, get into the Uber, and they could drive me as close as possible to the stadium because I didn't have time to go park in my normal parking spot and run all the way. So they were waiting on me. I get in the Uber and he does like, I tell him the situation and he was like a listener of my local show. So he understood the situation and he's like, we're going to get you there. He was like, I am going to be, Handsome Rob in the Italian Job. We're going to find a way. And he did. Shout out to him. I mean, he was driving like a bat out of hell. And so we get there and he lets me out right in front of Tiger Stadium. And the kickoff was 6:44, and I get into the radio booth because I sprint. And there's like this line to get into the media elevator, and they use the same ones like premium suites as well. Yep. And so like there was all these people that I recognized that want to talk about, can't talk, can't have conversations. I'm sorry, I'm not being rude. I got to get to the booth. And I'm like cutting everybody. And like the LSU coaches are like right behind me. I'm like, oh, this is actually good. I'm going to get in the elevator with these LSU coaches and I'm going to get up there. They're going to allow me to do it. And so thankfully, like Blake Baker and Joe Sloan are, all those guys are coming up. Actually, Blake was on the field. So it was Joe Sloan. I'm trying to think who the defensive coach was, but I remember seeing Joe. And so we all get on the elevator and we go up and I sprint off the elevator. I look like another Jason Statham character here in Crank, when he's in the elevator and he's got the epinephrine after he hits it in and comes out of the elevator sprinting. That was me when the doors open for the media elevator, try to get to the booth. So 6:44 kick. And I think I got there like 6:41 up into the booth. And so, national anthem's just finishing up. Here comes the coin toss, put the headset on, and called Ole Miss LSU. And that was, ended up being obviously a great game there, overtime game. And so I got a chance to pull the great value Kirk Herbstreit 2 in 1 day.
Kirk does it an entire season.
He doesn't have
the timeline. Yeah, he doesn't have the timeline that you did where you were rushing from point A to point B.
I got very lucky. Yeah.
Yeah, like you and Jordan Rodgers have to deal with a little bit more of like the tradition. It's not, and Jordan's got he's got the PJ situation, but you get what like it's so frantic to have to do that, and I can't imagine you for the first like 5 minutes of that game showing any sign whatsoever that you had just done that. That was probably something that you didn't discuss on air or anything like that. You just snapped in. You're like, I'm in Tiger Stadium. I'm ready to go.
Yeah, and it it helps that I knew the opponent. Like doing off campus every day, like I feel like you get a good idea of who the opponent is. It's in the SEC. I know Ole Miss. I know the roster. If it would have been like a non-conference game, like say like
UCLA.
UCLA comes to
Yeah.
mind, and I pulled double on that day, but thankfully our pregame show was in Baton Rouge that day. Like it happened to be LSU UCLA, but like even that, like I had to run to the booth that day, and look, there's a lot of names on a UCLA roster that I might know some. I surely don't know them all, and I got to give the starting lineups. And there's some changes right before kickoff, and their SID comes in there. He's like, "Hey, A, B, and C are out. Go ahead and put these three guys in there." And you're like, "Oh my god, where's my flip card? Where's the flip card at?" Because I felt like I had it. But so for me to pull off like the true double, it was okay. Ole Miss being the opponent. I watched tape when I was flying into New Orleans, and it's like kind of my last prep of the game. And then like Walter Nolan and Chris Paul and like all these names you already knew coming into the game. So that certainly helped.
If ever you need someone last minute prep, just hit me up. Moments notice, like, hey, just give me 5 minutes. Let's just get me in the right state of mind.
Yeah.
I'm always available. You know that. Okay. So if it's needed, I don't think it'll be
That's
needed
right.
with you.
No, I mean, certainly if I need to know how to say a name, and I mean this, I'm calling you. Like you're the guy that I'm going to call. And so I'm old school. Like I write like everything down. I write everything. There's no like spreadsheets. There's no like a lot of people do, things that you're probably supposed to do in 2024, like with the computer and the laptop and and the iPad. All those things are great. But there's something about like I have one now. Like I always have a pen in my hand, and it's going to be a flare tip. That's the only ones I use, and I go different colors. So whatever the team is, I write their notes in that color. And so when my eyes go down to the page,
Smart.
they know, okay, Ole Miss, it's red, or if you're playing Auburn, it's orange, or like whatever it might be. And so that's kind of my system. And so like I was trying to get all that done on the plane, but yeah, you would definitely, if I need to know how to say a name, I'm calling Connor.
We're like, all right, Yamaleava, Wigman. We're gonna go.
You and I are both on
yeah.
You and I are both on the Wigman stuff. It's like, guys,
we can do this.
Pronunciation guide. It's Wig, not Weg.
Yeah, I don't know
Let's
why.
all do this together.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. All right, let's talk some Bama-LSU here. What's the vibe of LSU coming off of what was just a shell shocking type loss against A&M? You get the bye week in between. Probably in some ways good timing. In other ways, you probably just want to play another football game again. Right. But where do you get the sense of in terms of where this team's at right now?
Yeah, what a weird game flow. I'm sitting here and I'm trying to think of one that had the same. One team dominating the first half and then completely getting dominated in the second half. 2005 LSU Tennessee. It was a Monday night in Tiger Stadium during hurricane time that year. We had multiple hurricanes and we were up 21-0. They brought in a backup quarterback, Rick Clausen, who actually, was a former LSU player, and he kind of led them on a comeback, and we lost that game in overtime. But the second half, like we didn't get dominated as bad as this happened, a couple of weeks ago, but it was still kind of the same game flow. We dominated the first half, couldn't put them away. And that's the only game that I could even remember had a game flow like that. So, certain situations played into it, but at the end of the day, you didn't make the plays and Texas A&M did. It's like, okay, well, how do you bounce back from that? Because you showed you can be that team in the first half, but you have got to try to one snap and clear that second half because it was as bad as it possibly could be. Garrett Nussmeier for the first time looked like a first-year starting quarterback. He hadn't shown that. The defense that's gotten better each and every week, well, they weren't ready for Marcel Reed. They started to give up, big plays on the ground, which is something they've really done a nice job of stopping really since the South Carolina game. And so I actually think that the bye week's perfect for them. And I'm like you, like I want to get back on the field. I want to get that bad taste out of my mouth. But they needed to. They had probably gotten the most they possibly could out of the situations that they had in front of them. Like they were getting players playing at their highest level. They were playing probably above where they were, like in a good way. Like they were raising their level of play, but they needed to get away, take a deep breath, get a couple of guys probably healthy. CJ Daniels is a name that a lot of people won't talk about. And they're not going to be because they didn't talk about Kyron Lacey and some other players, Aaron Anderson now. Like CJ Daniels is big, and he played I think 11 plays against A&M. Like that's a guy that LSU currently, the way they're built, they need a CJ Daniels, and so they kind of need everybody to be healthy because again, they were getting the most out of their guys, and Blake Baker certainly on defense. But I think they needed to hit a little bit of a reset, a little bit of a break as they head into this Bama game.
What do you make of the year that Nussmeier's had? Because I think if you had just looked at what he did to start off that A&M game, and then if he continues that and he continues to be one of the better quarterbacks in not just in the SEC but all of college football, you're thinking he's got a chance to go in the first round of the NFL draft. Now you're kind of looking at some of the flaws that you've seen late in some of these games. You're wondering, 1 year starter, is that maybe going to be a situation where he has to come back and you see more of these flaws with him? I think it's been more good than bad, but I'm kind of curious what the vibe of him has been, with the mistakes that he's made and obviously having a lot of those great games as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously right after the A&M game, like the fan base is questioning a lot of things, but it's like, guys, like, hold up. Like, let's take a look at, the second half against a really good South Carolina defense. Let's look at when they had to have him against Ole Miss, right? It was him versus Jackson Dart, and he was the winner of that battle. Like those fourth down throws that he made, I don't know there's anybody else in the SEC that could have thrown those with the anticipation that he did. And so I think there's been way more good. Like even in the UCLA or USC loss, like he played well in that game. So I think they understand that there's a lot of good there. The Arkansas game, he played fantastic, I thought. And so it's one of those situations where unfortunately you knew it was probably going to happen. He's going to have a first-year starter type game. Now it was really a half, but he had that. And remember, you and I talked about Nussmeier before he was even the starter. Like he still has a little bit of that gunslinger mentality. There's going to be some throws you're like, oof, man, you just got to throw that one into the ground or throw it up into the third row of the stands. And it just so happened that like all those moments kind of came at the worst possible time and at the same time. And so, I don't know how the fan base feels. Obviously, they're probably like, hey, we're spoiled. We've had Joe Burrow and Jaden Daniels in the last 5 years, but I think they're also a smart enough fan base where they understand you typically don't get this kind of production from a first-year quarterback, no matter how old he is. And so they're certainly on the Nuss bus. I don't think they've jumped off of what he can do. Now, this is going to be yet again another challenge for him. Kane Womack's going to have that defense, ready to go with some different looks because Womack, by the way.
Womack.
No, hold on now.
Kane Womack.
He told me himself.
Okay.
Should we call Kane? Actually, I can't call him during LSU Bama.
Let's if he calls it that way.
People say Womack, and he said Womack.
Kane Womack. See, I looked up like the Indiana pronunciation guide. I looked up the Bama pronunciation guide with him.
I looked up the Kane himself pronunciation guide. I'm gonna have to call him though, because you're so good. You're so good at this.
I want to know. I don't want to pronounce somebody's name wrong.
At least we don't say Womack. That's what everybody says, and that's definitely not right. Okay. Yep. All right. I feel like one of us is right, and so everybody else is wrong. Anyways, so he's going to have something ready for him. I mean, bye week, he's a great defensive mind, and Bama fans are like, we're not used to getting up this many points. Hey, he just got there. He's got a little bit of a different system. He hasn't even had the chance to recruit to that system, but all that being said, he's going to have something for Nussmeier in that offense. How do they handle that? You're going to be without Garrett Dellinger. He's ruled out. He had tightrope surgery. So you're going to have a new offensive lineman in there. That's going to be crucial. So look, Garrett Nussmeier is, if you win, it's going to be a reason why you win the game. There's no question about it. I still think he is a top tier SEC quarterback. I don't think you have any quarterback in the SEC running away with that title. And he's still firmly, for me, in that conversation. And so it'll be interesting to see what they do. It'll be interesting to see how he bounces back, right? And the offense became one-dimensional, to say the least, against Texas A&M, and that's a part that nobody really wants to talk about. But A&M, and hell, everybody in that stadium knew what LSU was going to do because it's all they could do. And when you become that in the SEC against a front seven like A&M, you're not going to have a lot of success, even if you have a really good offensive line, which LSU does. Like before that game, an offensive lineman hadn't been credited a sack to that point. But when you become that one-dimensional, when you run the ball, what was it, 23 times for 24 yards? Yeah, you're not going to have a great day at quarterback. And so he needs some of his partners around him to help him out as well.
What concerns you the most about Bama, and why is it anytime Ryan Williams isn't directly matched up with Zy Alexander.
Yeah. So is he going to travel? Like that's going to be key because Zy switched to Trey Harris in that game against Ole Miss.
Yep.
Trey Harris was cooking Ashton Stamps, right?
Yep.
And they missed him a couple times that he was open. Now, once Zy went over there, it was a different story. I don't know how much Blake travels like normally, and I know he does some of it, but I would have a hard time saying, hey, look, Zy, wherever he goes, pretty much. I mean, maybe it's not in absolutes, maybe it's 90% of the time, but Zy Alexander would be on Ryan Williams more than he's not. I know that for sure because he's your one guy. Like he is the guy right now that you can count on in the defensive backfield. It's a unit that is playing hard. They're playing more sound, but they're very limited, I think, outside of Zy Alexander. So that's one of the things, obviously, that if you're watching this from an LSU perspective, you're going to worry about. But also, like Jalen Milroe and what he can do with his legs. I mean, you just saw Marcel Reed. Now, again, you were planning for Wigman, and sure, there's some of that, and you've done good. You've done okay against some running quarterbacks this year. Arkansas, I thought you did well. Sellers actually got after you a little bit. He had the big hit there. That makes you terrified. It's not really like if they beat you in the passing game, like those are things I think you can overcome. If it turns into a game a la last year where you had no plan for Jalen Milroe and quarterback draws and things like that. Now, I have to imagine Blake Baker's going to have a spy. He's not going to pull a Matt House and just let him say, hey, guys, turn your back to Jalen Milroe and give him 12 free yards to get a running head start. I don't think it's going to be that. But who is that guy? Is it going to be Whit Weeks? If he's a spy, then that sounds like a plan, but you also take away the ability for Whit Weeks to react to other things. You take away the ability for Whit Weeks to add himself into the pressure, which he does a really nice job. Like a green dogging linebacker, when that running back, when you have him man and that running back decides, I'm going to stay in the protection or I'm going to block somebody else, and that linebacker immediately adds to the blitz. Whit Weeks does that as well as anybody with great timing. You lose that ability if he is the spy, but he's probably your most athletic linebacker. So it's like, all right, which way do we go? And so that's something Blake Baker and that staff has to decide who they spy Jalen Milroe with.
Yeah, it's a really interesting discussion. I'm very interested to see if Kalen DeBoer is going to recognize the need to have those design runs for Milroe, and more so even than he has for I think a little bit now with what he's tried to do with him offensively. Knew that was going to be a transition. Obviously, favorite memory in this rivalry for you has got to be 07 game-winning touchdown.
Is there actually? It's not. It's not.
Okay. All right. Fire away.
There's a couple actually of great memories against Alabama. Now, the 2005 Alabama team, they don't get their flowers. They don't get the credit they deserve. And me and Roman are boys, and I always tell him this. So Roman Harper, great all SEC safety, was on that team. D'Amico Ryans was all SEC linebacker on that team. Like we could go down. Brody Croyle was the quarterback. They were undefeated in November. In 05, we go and play them, and we win in overtime. Like it was a hell of a football game, and it was a battle. And that 05 Alabama team, they get forgotten about. And I understand, like, okay, I get it. Like, Saban comes, you win all these national championships, but that's a really good football team pre-Saban. And so that's like one of my, as in Bryant Denny as well. So that's one of my core memories against them. But probably the play that stands out the most is a play that got me drafted as high as I did in 07, but it wasn't the touchdown. Flynn threw an interception in that game.
As he does.
And always. He threw 3 that game, 3 in the first half, I think. And I'm trying to think of the corner. I think the corner, and gosh, excuse me if I get I think it was Kareem Jackson. Might have been the corner's name. Anyways, he's a high draft choice, but so he intercepts the pass. And when he does, I'm on the ground because I tried to cut block a guy on the edge. And so he intercepts it. He's down the sideline. Well, I get up and I chase him down and I catch him from behind. And I didn't think anything of the play. By the way, it's the only time I got a 15-yard penalty in my LSU career because I catch him and I'm in a sea of crimson and I'm trying to fight my way out of it. And of course, like the one guy in purple and gold trying to fight his way out of it, he gets the 15-yard penalty. So
and I'm blanking on this. Did you do a punch to the helmet or anything like that?
I think I pushed somebody.
It's weak.
Who did I push? It ended up being my teammate in San Diego, Castile, I think. Either way, I'll go back. I'll show you the evidence. It's grainy, but I'll show you the evidence. I have it somewhere, but I catch him from behind And again, like at the time, I didn't think anything of it. I get a 15-yard penalty, which I wasn't very proud of. It's the only one that I, ever got, I think, in my entire career. But when I went to the combine that year, everybody like that I talked to, scouts were like, "Hey, it doesn't really matter what you run tomorrow. Like, I'm just letting you know, like, that's the play that all of us have pulled up in our draft room is you chasing down the corner, getting off the ground, and catching him from behind." They're like, "Look, if you run a 4.6, 4.7, 4, whatever, like we know that in full pads, like you can do that now." And even when I got drafted by the Chargers, like AJ Smith, the GM, he's like, "Hey, you ran, about what we thought you would, but it was that play against Alabama that we knew we could count on you on like special teams. And like, if we had to have you carry the football at this level, that you could get it done because of me going to chase down a guy after Flynn threw an interception." And so, as you know, Matt Flynn, one of my best friends in this world, I'm like, "God, I'm glad you sucked that day, because if you didn't, I probably don't get drafted until like the 7th round."
Not the hurdle that you had to be able to get into the end zone.
No.
Nothing you did on offense. Not the million 4th downs you pick up against Florida, but the tackle that come from. Oh my God, that's incredible! Yeah. I didn't know that. Golly, just goes to show you got to be gritty all the time. Just you never know who's watching. That's the thing about grittiness. You never know when it's going to be appreciated. But that moment,
Connor, my life has been you never know who's watching. Like every opportunity that I've ever like gotten in my career, Coach Saban comes to my high school practice to recruit our quarterback, John David Booty. He went and won 2 Rose Bowls at USC. And we were doing an Oklahoma drill, like old school Oklahoma, while you could still do those things. And I guess I had a good day that day in that drill. And he had no idea who I was before he got there, before he got to that practice. He was there to see, I think he always tells a story, and he tells it better than I do, like 4 or 5 other guys from my high school, because I went to a really good high school. We had, 9 D1 guys, I think, my senior year. And he's like, "All right, who's 13? Tell me about the bowling ball." I think it's his exact words, playing running back over there. And so they tell him who I am. He watches the practice that day, and I get offered by LSU, by Nick Saban, after getting there that day, not knowing who in the world I was.
Weren't you the last scholarship offer?
Oh, yeah. I was the lowest rated guy. Yep. I was I was 2-star guy. Again, Coach Saban had no idea who I was. Recruiting was different. I mean, all that was kind of new. Like today, you probably like he would have had an idea, but that day back in 03 or whatever year that was, he had no idea. And it was because I didn't know he was watching. He was watching Oklahoma drill. And so like same thing, like for the Chargers, like one of the things that they talked about when they drafted me, we were at the Senior Bowl and it was me and Colt Brennan, and we stayed a little bit later. And yeah, absolutely. God, great human. Love that dude. And then Matt Forte was on my team as well. And then Tashard Choice, who's actually the running back coach at Texas. Well, us 3 stayed after, and we lined up out wide to like run some routes and just work on some different things at the running back position that we could like maybe do in the game to show versatility. And again, like the Chargers, AJ Smith, he's watching that practice, and he's watching me after practice run routes at the receiver position. Something that Norv had heavily in his offense was for the F to be split out wide. And that was another factor in me getting drafted as high as I did. And it's like, I had no idea that the Chargers were sitting there watching me run whip routes on the outside, just, kind of shooting the bull with Colt Brennan.
It's unreal. And go figure the Saban thing, of course, in 07 when he's the coach of Bama, and you realize, God, all I had to do was just not recruit that Jacob Hester guy, and we probably find a way to win this game. Although, I mean, with all due respect, it was an amazing hurdle. It was from the 1. Somebody else. No, you know what? No, I take that back. You're the only one that could have scored there. You're the only one that could have scored there.
Guys, Connor, you know me. I know thyself. I know what the vertical is, okay? Yep. Like, you probably didn't have to hurdle, but I remember, so Larry Porter's our running back coach, and it was not subtle at all. He looks over, and he goes, "Hey," and kind of gives this motion, like over the top. And I'm I'm like pointing to me, like, "You want Keelan in here? You want Trenton Holly? You want somebody else in here?" He goes, "No, you over the top." I'm like, all right. So it's predetermined that I was going to do it. It wasn't a feel thing because me, my style, like I never was going to leave my feet. But that's all you're getting because damn it, that's all I got. That's as high as I could get.
It was all you needed. It was beautiful. Speaking of lightly under-recruited running backs from the state of Louisiana, I say this not to bring up pain for you, but watching Dylan Sampson, man, the guy.
Sampson and Moss, both from Baton Rouge.
Good point. Golly, that's crazy to think about that. Yeah, I mean, I look at that guy and wonder how in the world was he lightly recruited? How did he get to this place where now he's on
Yeah.
any short list of best backs in all of college football? But like he didn't even get offered by LSU. I didn't realize that. Born in Baton Rouge and ends up going to he went to like Dutchtown High School, I think.
Yep.
And like
Yeah,
30
which
minutes
is
from campus.
About 15 minutes that way. Yep.
Yeah.
Not even that, probably 10 minutes that way. Yep.
What do you like about his game? Because I've been just blown away at how important he's been for that offense as they've obviously struggled to kind of find it in the passing game.
Look, you and I talked about this. I think it was during the summertime. Like you and I both know what Heupel wants to get done within that offense, and he wants to run the football. It's a big misconception of who they are. And it's like you just see, fast pace, and you see 11 personnel, and you see 2x2, and you're like, oh, well, they're a spread team. They're probably throwing it 60 times a game. When no, they want to run the football and they want to do it at a high level. But I think Sampson, for me, and maybe I'm missing somebody just off the top of my mind, I think he's the SEC Offensive Player of the Year.
I think, yeah, we agreed on that last Thursday. We were talking about that on Off Campus. I agree with you 100%.
I mean, how can he not be? Like what he's done for that team? He's almost got 20 touchdowns on the ground. Like he is a guy that, because Tennessee's offensive weapons at quarterback and receiver aren't as good as we thought they would be to this point. I think we can all agree there. And he's made up that slack, to your point. Like he's been good, but he's been good when everybody knows probably going into the game what he's going to do in the game and how much he's going to be featured in the game. Like that's been the most impressive part. Like if you had the quarterback and receivers at Tennessee going out there and they're also balling and they're also putting up all these huge numbers, it's like, well, okay, is it because everybody prepares for everything else? They prepare for him and they prepare for that run game. There's no question about it. So to me, the numbers he's putting up with an offense that has to have him do those things, it makes it that much more impressive. And I mean, we could sit here and I could throw out some other names of guys that deserve to be in the conversation. I'm not saying it's a one-man competition right now, but he would be on the forefront of my SEC Offensive Player of the Year. And come on, like none of us had that before the year. I'm trying to go back in I think I had Luther Burden was probably my Offensive Player of the Year heading into the season. Obviously that hasn't worked out and that offense hasn't worked out. So yeah, right now he is the reason why they are playing as well as they are offensively. Now the defense is obviously stacked as well.
The only SEC offensive player more like as valuable as Dylan Sampson, in my opinion, Diego Pavia. Like in terms of what he means for his team.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
But
it's true. Hey, you know what? The quarterbacks, y'all get enough, okay?
Exactly.
Y'all get enough. Let's give it to a running back. God, Diego is fun to watch, though.
Is there a comp he reminds you of? Because I was kind of thinking it was like 2018 Travion Williams, like a little bit of that. Different scheme, obviously, the Jimbo offense compared to what he's playing in with Heupel, but like kind of similar build, but the way he runs through contact, it's just he feels like just such a force, and obviously it's just been one of the better players in all of college football.
Now, like an A-chain comp, maybe the speed doesn't match up, but just with the physicality that he ran runs through contact,
yeah, people forget
you know what
that.
I mean?
Yeah,
like everybody just assumes like A-chain's like, oh, he's a track guy. Well, that's okay. Like LSU's got a track guy running back that runs through people. Like you can be both. Like I think Caden Durham does that at a high level. I actually think the A-chain would actually be, and actually Jimbo, I don't know if this is on air or off air. We were talking about Sampson and he kind of said he reminded him of him as well. So, I mean, let's just pick any Jimbo running back. How about that?
I like that. All right, let's end with the Jimbo. I was going to ask you Jimbo anyway. Let's end with this. You've gotten to speak with him regularly with off campus and being able to kind of pick his brain, talk all things football with him. I asked DJ this a couple of months ago when he was on. What's the sense you get about his desire to get back into coaching? Do you think that happens when the carousel kind of gets spinning in the next month?
Yeah, me personally, I do. Now he's laid out, man, this is fun. I get to wake up on Saturday, no pressure, nothing weighing on me, no expectation to do A, B, and C. And I can just sit here and I can watch the games and enjoy them and react to them on Tuesdays. That part of it, I do think he's really enjoying. And I think he's enjoying the time with his family that he's never really had before. But you can tell there's still a fire in there for him to go lead a team. Now, the question that I've never really had with him, the conversation I never had with him is like, what level would he want to get back in at? Would it be, hey, I'm only doing the Power 4. I'm only doing blue bloods. Maybe I'm open to going to a top tier G5. Like, I don't know that information. Like, I don't know if it would have to be a certain job in a certain place. So I still think he has the desire to coach. I'd be shocked if he doesn't roam a sideline here again in the next couple of years. But is that opportunity going to come for him to say, you know what? This is great, but I'm going to jump back in it? Because if it's not the right situation, I don't know that would be the best move, right? I mean, it's hard when you've been the guy at Florida State and Texas A&M. Like, can you go to Purdue or somewhere like can you do that? Can you make that be okay? And can you go to work every day feeling like you're attacking the day that you always have?
West Virginia is going to be the one that, if that, depending on how this goes last month for Neil Brown, that'd be the one that people will circle back to.
If West Virginia opens up and they call Jimbo, I would be surprised if Jimbo Fisher is not the next head coach of West Virginia.
I agree with that. Yeah. But it's going to have to be the exact right fit. It's kind of why Mullen hasn't gotten back into it. Loves the media thing, loves being able to watch these games, has soaked in all of it, but it's got to be the right fit with these guys, especially when they don't need the money. We know that Jimbo does not need the money to be able to get back into this.
I don't need Jimbo to go take a job. You know why? Because during the breaks, him and I talk about 8U flag football passing plays, and we talk about concepts, and he gives me some different concepts. And so we've got a couple of plays that are named after Jimbo in our playbook. And so if he goes and coaches somebody else, I won't have that access to him. So I actually, selfishly, I need him to stay exactly where he's at. We got to go win this ring, Connor.
Your kids are going to be dominating tackle football very, very soon. And seeing the clips of all of your kids dominate flag football, I'm just like, that's not fair for these other kids that they got to line up and face a Hester in flag football. They probably don't even know. And then they show up and they're like, oh God, we're going to be in for it. This is not going to be a fun time. Yeah.
The best part is, like, so my older sons now, they're playing tackle, and my oldest is a freshman. He's
that's right
at 6'2", 240.
He's big boy. Big boy.
Yeah, he's got me by a lot in both of those. And he embraces playing like edge and left tackle. Like, he's all about it. Like, he don't want to run the football, So all of them are a little bit different. Now, my two youngers, they want the ball in space.
Go players. Yeah.
That's what they want to do. And so, yeah, man, it's so much fun watching them kind of grow up. And one grown past me, and my 12-year-old is right looking eye to eye with me. He also wants to be like big brother. He's in the trenches right now. Now, he doesn't have the body type like older brother. He's a little light in the pants to be in the trenches, but he wants to be like older brother,
He's got time. He's got time. Yeah. He's 12. The growth spurt's going to come, I'm sure.
Hey, I tell him Dad played nose guard till he was a junior in high school. You never know,
When you're a gritty Hester, you play anyway, man. Wherever the frame dictates, that's where you go.
That's right. Just put on a neck roll and go play.
Love it. Well, I really appreciate this as always. We'll talk again. We'll talk again tomorrow, actually.
We'll talk tomorrow. Absolutely. Yeah. Every single week. It's the highlight of my week, Connor.
Highlight of my week. When I sign off, it's the low point of my week.
There you go.
Thanks, man. All right. Lad of the week. Let's we're gonna go to the same place, aren't we? I just know it. I know it based on the way this has gone in the past. We are both going to be talking about someone from South Carolina. Yep. True or false?
True. And I'll start off. It wasn't going to be their offensive coordinator. It's Shane Beamer, man. I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen a coach that I like rooting for more. I know that the folks in Clemson think he's too fun because they want their football experience to feel like church. I get it. But watching the emotions that Shane Beamer goes through, he looks like me as a fan or somebody that loves something, and while he doesn't have like this great historic connection to South Carolina in the way of like a Kirby Smart at Georgia, he feels all of the things for the fans. And I think that's the best thing that you can hope for in modern college football that's totally been taken over by, capitalism, NIL et al. Seeing him on the sidelines during a win just makes me understand why we love this sport so much. I've been joking with my girlfriend about, if you're with me, you're going to watch a lot of live TV. When you're joking about commercials, she was like, I never watched commercials before I was with you. It's like, yeah, because I'm always watching the news or I'm always watching sports. And the window we get into these guys' lives and the amount of media training they get, how similar they all look, even though Lane Kiffin starts to pick up, the Saban mannerisms as he gets more mature. And I think that, Shane Beamer, he's cringe, but he's free sometimes. He's himself. He's not scared to be himself. It's not an act. And I think it's super duper cool to have, if you're South Carolina, where your goals are, hey, we're going to pull up an episode or two every year. We're going to build. We're going to recruit. He's done all that. He's built the D-line. He's had bigger wins than, you could argue he's had bigger wins than anybody but like Saban, Kirby, and maybe Brian Kelly over the last like 3 years, if you count in 2022, because he's had 3 of these wins now, against Tennessee, against Clemson, and now against A&M. And it's just crazy how the guys play for him, believe in him, guy that started off the year in the hot seat and is now just fully taking himself off. And hopefully you can build on this and keep having a fun product for the field, man.
I like Shane a lot. I think anybody that listens to this pod would certainly acknowledge that. And he's one of those guys that I think if you are watching this sport without a rooting interest and you see him have success, it's pretty easy to get on board with that. There are other coaches that are a little bit tougher and you don't feel quite as good about when they're having a good moment. You kind of know where I'm getting at with that, Brian Kelly. But but I think with Beamer, yeah, it is genuine. Every conversation I've ever had with him, publicly, not publicly, has confirmed that he is kind of what South Carolina needs, chip on the shoulder type guy. And yeah, he's not going to have 100% approval rating. I don't expect that he ever will. But I do think in a post Muschamp world, I just can't emphasize enough how much of a breath of fresh air I think he is. And sure, he had to do things this year, like figure out the defensive line. You're exactly right. They needed to be able to figure out the ground game, which I'm going to get to in a second here, but has checked a lot of the boxes that I think you could have hoped for after Vibes. Just couldn't have been worse, really, at the end of the Muschamp era, and really could have been worse at the end of the Spurrier era if we want to go back to that as well.
And I've said that before. Like, if you're going to struggle, like when I covered the Orlando Magic, it felt very sterile. It felt very like stuffy. And I've always said, if you're going to struggle, make it fun. And when the Magic started rebuilding and they brought in all the stars, and it's like, well, we got Paolo, we got Franz. It's like, cool. I'll watch this brand of basketball, even if the record's the same, because I have something to believe in. And that's, I think, the difference with Shane Beamer and those other guys is like the end of Spurrier. Spurrier was definitely something to believe in, but when he stepped down and everything, like at those two eras at the end of the last coaches, now it's like, man, like I wouldn't give this up. Because it feels so great when it's working. And when it doesn't, it still feels better than when it was bad.
Very true. Very, very true. A part of that has been Rocket Sanders, who is my lad of the week. Could have very easily also just doubled up on Beamer. Could have gone Lenore Sellers, who, Lenore Sellers was brilliant in that game. And for all the talk we had about, it's kind of risky to be able to potentially put a pivotal season on his shoulders. He certainly looked the part in that game against a top 10 team. But, man, I just loved seeing Rocket do what he did. 25 touches, 236 scrimmage yards. He was just awesome. He was great. He was the perfect counterpunch for Sellers. Rocket's been waiting a long time for a night like that. He really has. The last time he had that many scrimmage yards in a game was when he and Judkins went back and forth in that 2022 Ole Miss Arkansas game where it's 30 degrees out. That was November 19th, 2022. So nearly 2 years removed from that. He had 261 scrimmage yards that night. And then after that was kind of when all this started for him. He just is dealing with like 3 or 4 different injuries, it feels like. And, it's kind of crazy to think last year at Arkansas where he comes in preseason All-American, didn't have a single run of 20 yards all year. I mean, he was not right. Yeah. And it was a lost season. It really was. And, that's after, 22, he had 4 scrimmage plays of 60 yards that year and was just a force. Though there were, I think, a lot of questions, not just from Arkansas fans, but college football in general, about his playing weight, maybe not staying in the right shape. And if you remember, like last year at Media Days, we talked about this a lot because Pittman raised some eyebrows when he said he's at 237 pounds, but he's running faster than ever. So as to not say he's at 237 pounds, period, next thought. You can't do that, right? Because then we're like, Sam, that seems not great. And I remember even kind of justifying it and being like, he's playing in a more pro-style offense with Dan Enos, woof. And, you don't have to run tempo as much. So maybe the conditioning is a little bit different. He can play at kind of a heavier weight. And it just, we play the results with stuff like that. It just didn't work out. But South Carolina added Rocket last year. It dates back to last year why they made the move to bring on somebody like him. Beamer spent the portal money last year elsewhere, and they didn't like the market for portal running backs. I'm pretty confident they thought Ray Davis was too expensive, and they didn't give Ray Davis what he was looking for. And I don't know how much regret there was in that. Ray Davis proved to be a great player for Kentucky, And they kind of guessed wrong on that. So Beamer, said, all right, this year we can't leave it up to, with all due respect to Mario Anderson, a Division II guy, to come in here and be a stud running back in the SEC. And they rolled the dice on Rocket, knew that he was going to have the labrum surgery, and it was a bit of a gamble. It really was. But like, if he could get healthy and if he could look like the 22 guy, or at least 75% of that, what a big lift that would be, and what a help it would be for a young quarterback. And I think so far he's proven to be that. 8th in the SEC in scrimmage yards per game in 22. And this is a guy that's already battled a midseason ankle injury, 7th in the SEC in rushing. Kevin Harris finished 2nd in the SEC in rushing in 2020. He is the only South Carolina player to hit 1,000 rushing yards in a season in the playoff era. Yeah. I don't know the Rocket's going to hit that. He'd have to play 5 more games, average about 86 rushing yards per game. Easier said than done, but very doable, especially if he looks like he did on Saturday night. I was happy for that guy. Really, really happy for that guy to have that type of moment. South Carolina certainly needed every bit of it.
Yeah, and I mean, something you hit on there too is just, the nature of playing running back, right? And I think we've seen more of guys that are running backs in like their freshman and sophomore year. They play really well, and then we see, the offense changes, new guy comes in, head coach gets fired, they get hurt, and they just sink into this place. And you think, oh my gosh, if they had been able to go pro a couple of years ago, it would have changed everything. And Rocket was so clearly turning. You talked about Kevin Harris, another case of one of those guys. His final year at South Carolina did not live up to the previous year because guys start keying in, all that stuff. So running back feels like one of those things that you got to hit it at the right moment. And it's so rare to have a guy like Rocket who just keeps playing and keeps playing and keeps playing, but hits, gets back to that early, hope based form. Judkins is honestly another guy that I would put right there. Like Judkins is, freshman. Oh my gosh, this guy's got nowhere to go. I think we see this over and over and over again. You can make a case for Fournette, right? Same deal. Freshman, sophomore year. Oh my gosh, and then draft eligible every year. And so for Rocket to come back to the SEC, to trust this, and in the preseason, and I was guilty of this too, talking about, KJ Jefferson's the guy they need to go in on. Well, instead they go in on Rocket, right? They trust Lenore Sellers. And to this point, I think it's pretty clear that they're right. Given how KJ is not starting, and I'm not playing the results there. I'm just saying that, this offense, we've seen the proof of concept. It was last weekend. And I think that Rocket's such a huge part of that. And we said it was just painful to watch him because we love that Sam Pittman team that was, good a couple of years ago with him and KJ, and how we kept rooting for them to be good. And yet it just kept bad news after bad news. And now it's like, wow, this guy has remade his career. Yeah, he's a little bit older, but he's shown you he's a little bit of that dual threat. He's a little bigger. He can still be fast. And he's a cool name. Easy guy to root for.
Easy guy to root for. Yes. Mm-hmm. And hopefully he can stay healthy and get himself some NFL eyes on him, because I think that would be very much on the table for him if he can finish this season strong and build off what he did against A&M. All right, Week 11, it is upon us. If you haven't, please leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch every single episode of the Saturday Down South podcast. Follow us on Twitter at the SDS Pod, at SatDownSouth, at CJ Guerra, at Go So Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.